Hey there, tonight we're diving into the bustling streets of medieval Florence, where the truth is, surviving the day could be as treacherous as navigating the labyrinth of its politics. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's not quite the bouquet of a Tuscan vineyard. Instead, it's the pungent mix of sweat, wood smoke, and maybe a hint of last night's garlic stew. Welcome to your new reality, a cramped room in 15th century Florence where personal space is as rare as a unicorn. You're sprawled out on a straw mattress, and if you're lucky, it's only you and a couple of family members sharing it. If you're not, well, the family's goat might be your bedfellow too. As you blink into consciousness, the sun barely peeking over the red-tiled roofs, you realize your rude awakening is just the start. Forget about the concept of privacy. Your day begins with the clamor of Florence outside your window, a symphonic blend of street vendors, clanging church bells, and the occasional donkey bray. This isn't some romanticized Renaissance fair. This is life, where the morning doesn't gently nudge you awake. It slaps you across the face and demands you get moving. Finding your feet, you stumble towards the table where a sparse breakfast awaits. If you're expecting a lavish spread, think again. A loaf of bread, maybe a hunk of cheese if you're living the high life. That bread, worth about 1 denaro. A minor expense, but when you're earning a mere 20 to 30 denarii a day, it adds up. The bread might be cheap, but so is your pay. Most of your hard-earned coin goes straight to keeping you and your family fed, with little left for luxuries like, say, new shoes. As you chew on your breakfast, let's talk currency because, oh boy, does it rule your life. Enter the gold florin, Florence's crown jewel of commerce. This shiny little coin isn't just local currency. It's the economic powerhouse of Europe, the euro of its day. Weighing in at about 5 grams, it's the standard for international trade. But don't get too excited. It's not like you're going to see one unless your name happens to be Medici or Bardi. For the average Joe or Giovanni, you're stuck with your carpa denari, trying to stretch them as far as they'll go. Stepping out into the streets, you're met with the bustling chaos of the morning market. Here, Florence is in full swing, a cacophony of haggling voices and clattering carts. Merchants shout prices and deals, each stall a treasure trove of goods from across the known world. Spices from the East, wool from England, silks from the Orient. Florence is a global hub, a melting pot where East meets West in a swirl of scents and colors. But remember, you're here for the essentials, not the novelties. The market isn't just a place for commerce. It's a social hub, a political arena, the beating heart of the city. It's where you catch up on the latest gossip, who's in power, who's on the outs, and what scandals brewing on the Ponte Vecchio. And speaking of power, the city's run by a guild system, a complex web of associations that control trade and politics. These guilds are your ticket to a stable job, but they're also the gatekeepers, ensuring that only those who play by their rules succeed. As you weave through the crowd, you can't help but marvel at the sheer vibrancy of it all. The city is alive, a living organism, each part working in concert with the others. But like any organism, it has its dark side. Poverty is rampant, and social mobility is more pipe dream than possibility for most. Sure, the Medici might be commissioning art that'll make history, but for you, today's success is measured in how far you can make your wages stretch. By the time the sun is high, you're elbow deep in the day's work, whatever that might be. Perhaps you're a craftsman, your hands calloused from years of labor. Or maybe you're an apprentice, learning the ropes and hoping one day to earn the title of master. Work is relentless, a never-ending cycle, because leisure is a luxury reserved for saints' feast days and wealthy patrons. Speaking of patrons, they're the ones you have to keep happy, because a few bad deals or a misstep in etiquette, and you could find yourself out on the street faster than you can say, Buongiorno. With the market winding down, you head homewards, the weight of the day pressing down on your shoulders. Today you manage to keep your head above water, but tomorrow will bring its own set of challenges. As you settle in for the evening, the same straw mattress awaiting you, you reflect on the resilience required to survive here. Florence is a city of beauty and brutality, where art and commerce dance a delicate tango, and you, dear time traveler, are just trying to keep up. And as you close your eyes, the sounds of Florence, its heartbeat, lulls you into a restless slumber. Here, in the heart of the Renaissance, you're not just a spectator. You're a participant in a history that's being written day by day, denaro by denaro. But with any luck, tomorrow's dawn won't be quite as rude. Yet, as the sun peeks over the red-tiled roofs, you're back at it, stepping into the cobblestone chaos that is Florence's streets. Forget the idea of a leisurely stroll. This is more like a medieval obstacle course. Welcome to the original rush hour, Florentine edition. Here, horse-drawn carts jostle for space with bleeding goats and stubborn donkeys. Merchants shout, offers like they're auditioning for the role of town crier, and the air is thick with a symphony of clatter and chatter. You might think navigating Manhattan traffic is bad, but at least there you don't risk stepping in something unpleasant. Ah, yes, the open sewers. A charming feature of the cityscape that'll make you appreciate modern plumbing like never before. Waste disposal in Florence is best described as toss it and forget it. Household refuse, chamber parts, and who knows what else are all emptied into the streets, making each alleyway a treacherous path of pungent surprises. It's a system that makes New York City's garbage woes look positively hygienic. When it rains, the streets transform into mini canals of muck, a test of agility for the unwary pedestrian. The Arno River, winding lazily through the city, is the ultimate destination for all this waste. It might look picturesque in the distance, but up close, it's more of a medieval dumping ground. Forget about a leisurely riverside picnic unless you're in the market for a new olfactory experience. Now, let's talk infrastructure, or the lack thereof. The cobbled roads of Florence might look charming in a postcard, but try pushing a cart full of goods over them, and you'll quickly discover why medieval chiropractors were probably in high demand. The city's narrow lanes, a labyrinthine puzzle of dead ends and twisting turns, ensure that getting lost is a feature, not a bug. There's no Google Maps here, just your wits, and the occasional helpful local who may or may not send you in the right direction. As you dodge a particularly aggressive chicken, let's pivot to the social hierarchy that defines your daily grind. At the top of the food chain are the Medicis, Florence's ruling dynasty and the ultimate Renaissance influencers. Picture the Kardashians with a penchant for commissioning iconic art and dabbling in politics. Their wealth and power are as vast as the Arno is brown, making them the kingpins of Florentine society. But unless you're on a first-name basis with Lorenzo the Magnificent, don't expect to get invited to any of their glamorous soirees. Below them, you've got your successful merchants and guild members, the middle class who keep Florence's economic engine humming. They're the ones trading in wool, silk, and spices, living relatively comfortable lives compared to the masses. But don't get too envious. Every denaro is hard-earned, and one wrong move in this cutthroat city can send you tumbling down the social ladder faster than you can say, arrive at Versailles. For the everyday laborer, life is a different story. You're the backbone of Florence, the artisans, craftsmen, and workers who keep the city's wheels turning. But social mobility is about as likely as finding a unicorn grazing by the Arno. The guilds control the trades, and joining one isn't just a career move, it's a lifetime commitment. They're like a medieval mafia, offering protection and stability for those who follow their rules, but shutting doors on anyone who doesn't play the game. And now, let's bust some myths about this so-called romantic medieval lifestyle. Sure, the Renaissance is a period of great art and culture, but for most Florentines, the daily grind is far from glamorous. You've got long hours, low pay, and the ever-present threat of illness or injury. Medicine is rudimentary at best, so a minor cut could mean serious trouble. Forget about antibiotics. Your best bet is a prayer and maybe some dubious herbal remedies. Food isn't the cornucopia of delights you might imagine either. While the rich feast on imported delicacies, your diet is mostly bread, beans, and the occasional vegetable. Meat is a luxury, and when you do get it, it's often salted or dried to survive the long storage times. So, if you're dreaming of a Tuscan feast, prepare for a reality check. For the average Florentine, every meal is a reminder of the struggle to make ends meet. Despite the hardships, there's an undeniable energy in Florence. The city is alive, buzzing with activity and ambition. It's a place where art and commerce collide, where every corner holds a new story waiting to be told. Yet beneath the vibrant surface lies a harsh reality, a daily fight for survival in a world where beauty and brutality coexist. As you weave through the throngs of people, merchants pack up their stalls, and the streets begin to empty. The market's pulse slows, but Florence never truly sleeps. It's a city of contrasts, where the rich tapestry of life is woven with threads of resilience and determination. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin anew, and you'll step once more into the chaotic dance of life in medieval Florence. But for now, you've survived another day in this extraordinary city, a testament to the gritty spirit of those who call it home. So, another day in medieval Florence is underway, and what's next on your agenda? Lunch. But don't get too excited and expect a multi-course Italian feast. Spoiler alert, this is not the age of pizza and pasta. Your midday meal is more like survival with a side of piety. Picture this, a big hunk of bread, perhaps some beans, and if you're really living the high life, a slice of cheese. You see, medieval dining was less about flavor explosions and more about keeping the hunger pangs at bay. Bread is the cornerstone of your diet. You're munching through about 2 to 3 kilograms of this stuff a week. It's your culinary lifeline, with grain prices being the economic pulse of the city. A loaf sets you back about 1 denaro, and given the average daily wage is around 20 to 30 denarii, bread is your bread and butter, literally. But don't get too comfortable. A bad harvest or a spike in grain prices means that loaf becomes a luxury faster than you can say pain. Let's talk meat. You might imagine grand banquets with roasted boar and turkey legs, but unless you're a Medici, you're more likely to encounter meat in its salted, dried, or questionably fresh form. Poultry and pork are the stars of the common Florentine table when they make an appearance at all. And here's the kicker. Meat consumption is often dictated by religious observance rather than culinary preference. It's a case of eating what you can, when you can, and saying a little prayer that it doesn't send you rushing to the nearest chamber part. Speaking of flavor, if you're dreaming of a spice-laden dish, think again. Spices are the medieval equivalent of a Louis Vuitton handbag, luxurious, exotic, and a statement of wealth. Only the rich could afford the likes of cinnamon, cloves, and pepper, imported painstakingly through trade routes that would make Marco Polo blush. Sugar, too, is a hot commodity, reserved for the upper crust, both literally and figuratively. The rest of us are stuck sweetening our lives with honey, if we're lucky, or just a cheery disposition. Now, let's sprinkle a little historical context into this culinary concoction. Enter the Black Death, the 14th century pandemic that wiped out about 1/3 of Europe's population. This bubonic plague didn't just decimate people. It upended economies and disrupted food supplies. With fewer mouths to feed, you'd think more food to go around, right? Wrong. Labor shortages meant fields went untended, and trade routes were, let's say, less reliable than a medieval oath. The result? Prices soared, and scarcity became the grim reality. As you contemplate your lunch, you're also living in a time when public health is more of an abstract concept than a practiced policy. Forget about sanitation inspectors or food safety regulations. The local butcher might be more concerned with selling his wares before they spoil than ensuring they're fit for consumption. It's a culinary game of Russian roulette with a side of faith. Then there's fasting, a curious medieval practice that's as much about religious devotion as it is about dietary necessity. The medieval calendar is peppered with fast days, about 100 to 140 a year, when meat and sometimes dairy are off the menu. It's penance by plate, a reminder of spiritual discipline over indulgence. But let's be real, often this is more of a forced austerity than a voluntary sacrifice, especially when the purse strings are tight. So, as you nibble on your bread and beans, remember that medieval Florence's allure lay not in the gastronomic delights, but in the resilience of its people. They navigated a world that was as unpredictable as it was precarious, where fortune could shift with the wind, and every meal was a testament to survival. Here, in the heart of the Renaissance, life is a balancing act. You're part of a legacy that's as rich and textured as the frescoes adorning the city's walls, even if your lunch is anything but. And as the afternoon sun casts its warm glow over Florence, you're not just eating. You're participating in a centuries-old dance of scarcity and abundance, of hope and hardship. It's a moment that speaks volumes about the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to the tenacity of those who dared to dream amidst the dust and din of daily life. But don't get too relaxed. There's still plenty of daylight left, and Florence waits for no one. As you gather your energy for the afternoon's endeavors, the city hums with the promise of more stories yet to unfold. The Medici might be the ones commissioning grand artworks, but you, dear traveler, are painting your own picture of life in this extraordinary epoch. So hold tight. The day's not over, and neither is the history waiting to be made. As the afternoon sun casts its golden glow over the bustling streets of Florence, you're about to dive into the heart of its economic engine. No, not the Medici vaults, but the gritty, grimy world of the guilds. These associations aren't just clubs for the elite. They're the puppet masters pulling the strings of every trade and craft in the city. From textiles to banking, if there's a florin to be made, a guild is involved. Let's start with the basics. Guilds are the medieval answer to LinkedIn, but with less networking and more elbow grease. They control who gets to work, how they work, and how much they earn. Think of them as a cross between a labor union and a mafia family, minus the cement shoes. Want to be a blacksmith? Better join the Art dei Fabbri. Aspiring weaver? The Art della Lana is your ticket in. These guilds are the gatekeepers of Florence's economy, and joining one isn't just a career move. It's a lifetime commitment sealed with the sweat of your brow. But joining isn't as simple as filling out a form and paying a fee. Oh no, you've got to earn your stripes. Enter the apprenticeship system, where young hopefuls are taken under the wing of a master craftsman. This isn't some cushy internship with free coffee and a trendy office space. It's years of grueling labor, often starting as early as age 12, with days stretching from sunrise to sunset. You're looking at a solid decade of learning the ropes before you can call yourself a master. And by learning, I mean you're doing the grunt work while trying not to get on your master's bad side. The hours are long, the work is hard, and the pay is, well, let's just say you're not getting rich anytime soon. But the payoff, a shot at becoming a master yourself, with the chance to open your own workshop and maybe, just maybe, earn enough to join the ranks of the city's respected artisans. Guilds aren't just about work, though. They're also deeply embedded in the political fabric of Florence. These organizations wield significant power, often having a say in the governance of the city. Picture a city council meeting where half the room is filled with people who can make you the best pair of shoes you've ever worn. It's a delicate balance of commerce and politics, with guilds often backing candidates and policies that favor their interests. Now, let's talk about the big players in this economic game, the wool and silk industries. Florence is a textile powerhouse, with its cloth prized across Europe. The Wool Guild, Art della Lana, is one of the most powerful, controlling not just production, but also trade routes and markets. They're the textile tycoons of the Renaissance, and their influence extends far beyond the city walls. And then there's banking, because who doesn't love a good story about money and power? Florence is home to some of the most influential bankers of the time, none more famous than the Medici family. These guys didn't just roll coins, they rolled in them. With their innovative banking practices, the Medici turned Florence into the financial center of Europe. Forget about Bitcoin. The Medici florin is the currency that everyone wants a piece of. But the Medici aren't just bankers. They are the puppet masters of Florentine politics. Through strategic marriages, alliances, and a little bit of good old-fashioned bribery, they rise from obscure wool merchants to the de facto rulers of Florence. It's a classic rags-to-riches tale, with a few assassination plots and exiles thrown in for good measure. Cosimo de' Medici, also known as Cosimo the Elder, is the patriarch who lays the foundation for the family's dominance. His savvy moves and deep pockets ensure that the Medici grip on power is as firm as a banker's handshake. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, or in this case, great jealousy. The Medici's rise isn't without its challenges. Rival families and political factions are always lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to topple them. It's a game of chess where the stakes are life and death, and every alliance is as fragile as a piece of Murano glass. As you wander through the city, each workshop you pass tells a story of ambition and toil. The clatter of hammers, the hum of spinning wheels, the rhythmic thud of looms, all echo the pulse of a city that's as industrious as it is beautiful. These artisans, whether crafting fine fabrics or casting bronze statues, are the backbone of Florence's economic might. Yet beneath the surface lies the harsh reality. For most, life is a grind, a constant hustle to make ends meet. The guilds might offer stability, but they also stifle innovation, keeping a tight lid on who can do what and how. It's a system that values tradition over creativity, rules over risk. And while the Medici might be commissioning art that'll stand the test of time, the average Florentine is more concerned with the test of survival. So, as you stroll through the winding streets, remember that Florence's splendor is built on the backs of those who labor tirelessly. It's a city where art and commerce coexist in a delicate dance, each step a testament to the resilience of its people. And as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the red-tiled roofs, you realize that in Florence, history isn't just something you read about in books. It's alive, vibrant, and waiting to be discovered. One guild meeting, one workshop, one whispered secret at a time. In the heart of this Renaissance city, you're not just a bystander. You're part of a living tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, power, and intrigue. And as the day turns to night, Florence's story continues, a never-ending saga of human endeavor and aspiration. So keep your eyes open and your senses sharp, because in this city, every corner holds a new tale waiting to be told. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting Florence in shades of amber and shadow, the city doesn't just slow, it transforms. The vibrant bustle of day gives way to the subdued hum of evening, and suddenly you're thrust into a world where darkness reigns supreme. But hold your horses, or should I say, your donkeys, because there's no flick of a switch to banish the encroaching night. Welcome to a time when illumination is a luxury, and the glow of streetlights is as fantastical as a dragon siding. In medieval Florence, light is anything but abundant. The city relies on candles, oil lamps, and perhaps the occasional bonfire to fend off the Inkai blackness. Candles, crafted from tallow or beeswax, are the go-to luminaries, but they don't come cheap. A single beeswax candle might set you back a handful of denarii, and for the average Florentine family, that's an indulgence reserved for the wealthier. So, most folks make do with tallow, a material that, while cheaper, is also notorious for its less-than-pleasant aroma. It's a trade-off between smell and sight, and let's just say, medieval noses were far more forgiving than ours. Once the sun sets, the city enforces a curfew, a medieval version of you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. The streets are no place for the faint-hearted after dark, with crime lurking in the shadows and the ever-present threat of fire. This isn't just about safety, it's about control. The curfew is strictly enforced, with night watchmen patrolling the streets, ensuring that Florentines are tucked away in their homes. Anyone caught wandering without good reason might find themselves face-to-face with a hefty fine, or worse, a night in the city's less-than-comfortable jail. So, what's a medieval Florentine to do for entertainment once the sun calls it quits? Well, let's just say Netflix and chill wasn't on the menu. Entertainment options are limited and often dictated by the church's iron grip on social norms. Religious festivals are the highlight of the calendar, transforming the city into a kaleidoscope of processions, feasts, and theatrical performances. These aren't just celebrations. They're spiritual spectacles designed to reinforce faith and community in a time where both are as crucial as bread and water. And then there are the more macabre forms of entertainment. Public executions draw crowds like a medieval blockbuster, a grim reminder of the justice system's harsh realities. It's a chilling spectacle where morality, punishment, and public order intersect. Executions serve as both a deterrent and a grim form of communal bonding, a dark reflection of the era's values where life and death is a public affair. But beneath this grim veneer lies a city alive with whispered secrets and hidden pleasures. Taverns offer respite from the darkness, their doors a welcoming glow against the night. Inside, patrons huddle over mugs of ale, sharing tales tall and true, forging connections in the flickering candlelight. It's a place where the barriers of class and stature blur, if only for a moment, amidst the laughter and clinking of mugs. As you settle into your straw mattress, the city's heartbeat a steady thrum beneath your feet. It's hard not to reflect on the stark contrast between the Florence of historical lore and the gritty reality of its day-to-day life. The Renaissance, a time often romanticized as an era of enlightenment and beauty, is also one of hardship and struggle. It's a world where art and culture flourish amidst poverty and plague, where beauty and brutality coexist in a delicate, precarious balance. The romantic notion of medieval life, with its knights and fair maidens, grand feasts, and courtly love, is but one side of the coin. The other side is a tale of survival, of grappling with the relentless challenges of a world where fortune is as fickle as the wind. Florence, with its grandeur and its grime, embodies this duality. It's a city where the past isn't just a story. It's a living, breathing entity that shapes every stone and shadow. And yet, the legacy of this era isn't just in its art or its architecture, but in the resilience of its people. It's in the hands of the artisans who craft beauty from raw materials, the merchants who navigate the turbulent seas of commerce, and the everyday citizens who find joy amidst the struggle. The lessons of medieval Florence are etched into the fabric of history, a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. So, as you drift into a fitful slumber, remember that you're not just a spectator in this historical narrative. You're part of a story that spans centuries, a tale of ambition, power, and survival. In the heart of Florence, amidst the darkness and the light, you've walked alongside the ghosts of history, and in doing so, you've glimpsed the true essence of an extraordinary era. In the end, the allure of medieval Florence is not just in its romanticized past, but in the unyielding spirit of its people. It's a spirit that transcends time, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there's a light that endures. So, dear traveler, as you close your eyes, may the echoes of history lull you to sleep, and may the dawn bring new stories waiting to be discovered. In the bustling maze of Alexandria, a city that was the Las Vegas of ancient scholarship, minus the slot machines, but with way more scrolls, there lived a woman who was something of a historical unicorn. Hypatia of Alexandria was the 4th century brainiac who could probably outmath anyone today, all while wearing a toga. Born around 355 CE, Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and philosopher who was that rare breed of ancient stage parent, the kind who pushed his kid into Euclidean geometry instead of showbiz. And thank the gods for that, because Hypatia was about to become the intellectual rock star of her age. Theon, you see, wasn't just any math nerd. He was a serious player at the Mousean, that fabled center of learning which was basically the Ivy League of its day, minus the exorbitant tuition fees. Rumor has it he liked to dabble in editing Euclid's Elements. You know, that textbook on geometry you pretended to read in high school. It was under Theon's watchful eye that Hypatia received an education that would make modern-day tiger moms proud. We're talking the whole shebang: mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and maybe even a bit of that mysterious, mystical Neoplatonism. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this a time when women were supposed to be seen and not heard? Well, yes and no. Ancient Alexandria had a weirdly progressive streak when it came to education and intellectual pursuits. Sure, most women weren't exactly encouraged to become scholars, but Hypatia wasn't most women. She was the Alexis Rose of the ancient world, completely unique, unapologetically herself, and somehow indispensable to everyone around her. By the time she hit her intellectual stride, Hypatia was a symbol of intellect in an era that was, let's be honest, pretty low on female representation. Fast forward past the awkward teenage years, no ancient prom queens here, and she was lecturing at the Neoplatonic School of Philosophy in Alexandria. Her subject, virtually everything. From mathematics to astrology, she held her own in a male-dominated field, and people actually traveled to hear her speak. Think of her as the TED talk of her time, but with fewer PowerPoint slides. In a world where most women were relegated to the roles of wife, mother, or, if they were lucky, the occasional priestess, Hypatia was rolling with the intellectual big dogs, and she had no qualms about it. She effectively shattered the glass ceiling with a stylus, which, as far as we know, is much harder than using a hammer. Let's pause for a minute to debunk some myths, because every legend comes with a side order of exaggeration. One popular narrative has Hypatia inventing the astrolabe, that nifty gadget ancient mariners used to navigate the seas. While she was certainly involved in its development, she likely didn't single-handedly invent it. But who needs an astrolabe when you've got charisma and a keen understanding of mathematics? Right. Another tall tale paints her as a romantic figure, tangled in some sort of torrid love affair. Spoiler alert. There's no evidence she was ever married or even interested in romance. Apparently, she had more important things to do, like teaching and, advancing human knowledge. Hypatia's life wasn't just a series of intellectual triumphs. She lived in a city teeming with political, religious, and social tensions, sort of like a Game of Thrones episode, but with fewer dragons and more philosophical debates. The early 5th century was a rough time for Alexandria, with Christians, Jews, and pagans vying for influence. Hypatia, a pagan in a city increasingly dominated by Christians, had to walk a tightrope of diplomacy. Yet she managed to navigate this minefield with the grace of a tightrope walker in sandals. She maintained friendships with power players like Orst, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, which probably helped her avoid becoming history's first cancelled celebrity. Despite being a pagan, she was respected by many Christians for her intellect and fairness. She was the Switzerland of philosophers, neutral but highly influential. Hypatia's early life and education set the stage for a career that would make her not just a scholar, but a symbol, a beacon of intellect, in an age when women were often relegated to the shadows. Her legacy would endure long after her untimely death, which, spoiler alert, was as dramatic as any Greek tragedy. But that's a story for later. For now, let's appreciate Hypatia for the trailblazer she was, a woman who didn't just play the game of life, but rewrote its rules with elegance and wit. Fast forward to Hypatia setting the intellectual world ablaze, and you find yourself smack in the middle of her heyday, with Alexandria's scholars tripping over their sandals to catch a glimpse of her brilliance. Picture this, a classroom that was more the Colosseum of the mind than a stuffy lecture hall. Students came not just to learn, but to witness the phenomenon that was Hypatia, a woman who knew her way around a Pythagorean theorem like a chef knows a perfect soufflé. Hypatia's classroom was the ancient world's answer to a standing-room-only TED talk. We're talking mathematicians, philosophers, and astronomers all cramming into the Mausian to hear her speak. You could practically feel the intellectual buzz in the air, as if Plato himself might walk in and ask for a front-row seat. But what made Hypatia so magnetic? It wasn't just her smarts, though she had those in spades. It was the way she combined intellect with an almost revolutionary charisma. She could break down the complexities of Euclidean geometry while making it sound like the hardest new gossip from the agora. In a world where the average yearly salary was probably just a few hundred drachmas, Hypatia's lectures were priceless. Her curriculum wasn't just a dry recitation of facts. It was an exploration of the universe's mysteries, sprinkled with enough philosophy to make you question your very existence. And let's face it, who doesn't love a little existential crisis with their math lesson? Speaking of math, Hypatia made significant strides in the field, building on her father's work with Euclid. She didn't reinvent the wheel, mathematically speaking, but she sure as heck polished it until it shone. Her commentary on Diophantus's Arithmetica was like applying a filter to a blurry snapshot, making the complex algebraic concepts clearer for her students. She had a knack for taking what was essentially the ancient world's SAT prep and turning it into an engaging story about numbers and their possibilities. Hypatia also dabbled in astronomy, and by dabbled, I mean she could probably chart the stars in her sleep. Remember, this was an era when the Earth was still considered the center of the universe. Geocentrism was as popular as the Caesar haircut, yet Hypatia's work on the astrolabe and the planisphere, tools that helped map the heavens, suggested a universe far more complex than her contemporaries dared to dream. She was the Carl Sagan of her day, inviting her audience to join her on a cosmic voyage, all without leaving Alexandria. Her influence wasn't limited to her own lectures, either. Students flocked from all over the Roman Empire to learn from her, bringing her ideas back to their own cities like intellectual souvenirs. If you think about it, Hypatia was like an ancient influencer, spreading her philosophy not through hashtags, but through scrolls and spoken word. Her impact was viral in a pre-internet world, which is no small feat when your biggest communication tool is a wax tablet. Now, let's pause to debunk another myth that stuck to Hypatia like ancient gum on a sandal. There's a narrative that paints her as a tragic romantic figure, an ancient version of a star-crossed lover. While it's tempting to imagine her as a heroine in a historical romance, there's no evidence to support it. The real Hypatia was more concerned with the cosmos than Cupid. She shunned marriage, possibly because it would have interfered with her scholarly pursuits, or maybe she just knew that algebra was more reliable than any suitor. Despite the myths, the reality of Hypatia's life was already dramatic enough to make a compelling story. She was a philosopher in a time when philosophy was a contact sport, with thinkers clashing like intellectual gladiators. Her ability to navigate the politically charged atmosphere of Alexandria was a testament to her diplomatic prowess. In a city where one wrong word could make you persona non grata, Hypatia balanced on the knife's edge of public opinion, respected by pagans and Christians alike. Her classroom was more than just a place of learning. It was a melting pot of ideas and cultures, a vivid tapestry woven from the threads of different philosophies. Imagine the rich debates, the clash of opinions, and the fervent discussions that must have filled those walls. It was a microcosm of Alexandria itself, a city at the crossroads of the ancient world, where East met West, and ideas were as valuable as gold. But let's not romanticize it too much. Hypatia's Alexandria was a city simmering with tension, a place where political and religious lines were drawn in the sand. Hypatia, a pagan in a city increasingly leaning towards Christianity, found herself in a precarious position. She was a symbol of the old ways in a world rapidly changing, a beacon of Hellenistic thought in an era inching toward the Middle Ages. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, the chaos around her, Hypatia remained focused on her work. Her commitment to education and knowledge was unwavering, even as the world outside her classroom grew more volatile. She was part of a dying breed of scholars who believed in the power of reason and inquiry, a legacy that would echo through the ages long after her voice was silenced. As we dive deeper into Hypatia's life and contributions, it's essential to remember that her story is more than just a footnote in history. It's a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be defined by the limitations of her time. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of her remarkable life, exploring how her ideas shaped the intellectual landscape of the ancient world and beyond. Now, let's switch gears and plunge into the chaotic cauldron of Alexandria's socio-political landscape, where Hypatia found herself navigating the choppy waters of public life. Imagine a city that was as culturally rich as it was politically unstable. Alexandria in the early 5th century was like a pressure cooker of religious fervor, with pagans, Christians, and Jews all vying for the top spot on the divine leaderboard. It was a place where even a minor theological disagreement could escalate faster than you can say heresy. At the heart of this swirling vortex of ideas and ideologies was Hypatia, whose role extended far beyond the classroom. This wasn't just about teaching the Pythagorean theorem or waxing philosophical about the cosmos. No, Hypatia was also a political advisor, a role that required the finesse of a diplomat and the wisdom of a philosopher. She rubbed shoulders with the power elite, including Orsts, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, who was basically the city's political quarterback. Orsts was a pagan sympathetic to the Christian majority, and his relationship with Hypatia was not just one of friendship, but also of strategic importance. But let's not paint her as some Machiavellian puppet master. Hypatia's influence was more about respect and intellect than manipulation. Her counsel was sought because she was seen as a voice of reason in an increasingly unreasonable world. The tensions in Alexandria were not just your garden-variety squabbles. They were full-blown ideological battles. The Christian Bishop Cyril, for example, was like a walking embodiment of religious zeal, and his relationship with Orsts was as frosty as a Roman ice bath. Hypatia, caught in the middle, had to tread carefully to maintain her status and safety. So why did her opinion matter so much? Well, Hypatia was a symbol of the Hellenistic tradition. She represented a world where knowledge was power and wisdom was the ultimate currency. In a city where religious identity was increasingly becoming the measure of one's worth, Hypatia stood as a secular beacon, a reminder of Alexandria's glory days as an intellectual powerhouse. Her presence was a thorn in the side of those who wanted to see the city fully embrace its Christian identity. But being a symbol came with its own set of challenges. The more Hypatia became a figurehead for the old ways, the more she became a target for those who saw her as an obstacle to religious and political dominance. Her friendship with Orsts, while advantageous, also painted a bullseye on her back. In a city where alliances shifted with the sands, this was the kind of relationship that could turn dangerous faster than you could say political intrigue. Now, let's debunk some myths while we're at it. There's a persistent narrative that Hypatia invented several scientific instruments, like the hydrometer and the astrolabe. While it's true that she likely contributed to their development, the idea of her single-handedly inventing them is about as plausible as a toga party in a snowstorm. What she did do, and brilliantly I might add, was refine and teach these concepts in ways that made them accessible to her students, ensuring that the knowledge was passed on and not lost to the annals of history. And then there's the whole romantic entanglement angle. Some stories portray Hypatia as a tragic romantic figure, entangled in love affairs that rival a Shakespearean drama. But let's be real, there's about as much evidence for these affairs as there is for unicorns prancing through the streets of Alexandria. Hypatia's life was consumed by her work and the never-ending quest for knowledge. She wasn't exactly the Jane Austen heroine pining for Mr. Darcy. She was more interested in the mysteries of the universe than the mysteries of the heart. In the end, Hypatia's role as a political advisor and intellectual giant in a city teetering on the edge of chaos is a testament to her enduring legacy. She was a woman who defied categorization, a scholar who became a symbol, and a political player who never lost sight of her true purpose, the pursuit of knowledge. Her life was a balancing act on the razor's edge of history, and while her story is often shrouded in myth, the reality is compelling enough on its own. As we continue to unravel the threads of Hypatia's remarkable life, remember that her story is not just about the past. It's a reflection on the timeless struggle between knowledge and ignorance, reason and fanaticism. In a world where ideas can be as dangerous as weapons, Hypatia's legacy is a reminder of the power of intellect and the courage it takes to stand against the tide. Stay tuned for more as we delve deeper into the complexities of her world and the events that would ultimately lead to her tragic end. As the sun set on Hypatia's Alexandria, the city was a simmering cauldron ready to boil over. This wasn't just any city. It was the intellectual heart of the ancient world, yet it was now caught in a tug-of-war between old pagan traditions and the rising tide of Christianity. And smack in the middle of this cultural maelstrom was Hypatia, whose very existence seemed to challenge the status quo. But let's cut to the chase. How did this brilliant scholar end up as a pawn in a brutal game of power and religion? First, let's set the stage. It's the early 5th century CE, and Alexandria is no longer the cosmopolitan haven it once was. The city is divided, not just by religious lines, but by political ones too. Enter Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, a man whose zeal for Christianity was matched only by his ambition. Cyril wasn't just playing for religious dominance. He had his eyes on the political prize too. His rivalry with Orsts, the Roman prefect and Hypatia's friend, was the kind of clash that could keep a soap opera running for years. Here's a juicy tidbit. Orsts, being a pagan, was naturally at odds with Cyril, and their relationship was as warm as a polar bear's nose. Hypatia's close ties with Orsts didn't exactly win her any fans in Cyril's camp. But why did Cyril see her as a threat? Well, Hypatia was the embodiment of Hellenistic learning, a symbol of the secular world that Christianity was striving to replace. She was like a living relic of Alexandria's glorious past, and that was a bit of a sticking point for Cyril, who wanted to steer the city into a new era under his influence. Now, let's talk about rumors. In the ancient world, these were like a game of telephone gone horribly wrong. Once a whisper started, it could spread faster than a wildfire in a drought, and for Hypatia, the rumors were particularly insidious. It was suggested that she was using her influence over Orsts to keep him stubbornly pagan and resistant to Cyril's overtures. This wasn't just idle gossip. It was a ticking time bomb. The economic context here is crucial. Alexandria wasn't just a hub of philosophical thought. It was also a vital economic center with a bustling port that facilitated trade across the Mediterranean. Whoever controlled Alexandria had a grip on a significant chunk of commerce, and that meant more power, more wealth, and more influence. Cyril's ambitions weren't just about spiritual guidance. They were about control over this economic powerhouse. The tension reached a boiling point in 415 CE. A group of Christian zealots, whipped into a frenzy by the political and religious tensions, decided to take matters into their own hands. They accused Hypatia of witchcraft, a charge as baseless as it was dangerous. In a city where the lines between science and superstition were still murky, this was a serious allegation. Witchcraft in this context was less about cauldrons and broomsticks and more about the fear of intellectual and cultural influence outside the church's control. So how did this play out? Tragically, Hypatia was seized by a mob, possibly led by a lector named Peter, and dragged to a church where she was brutally murdered. Reports suggest she was stripped, beaten, and then killed in a horrific manner, her body dismembered and burned. It's a gruesome end for someone whose life was dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and the betterment of humanity. But why such brutality? The answer lies in the power of fear and the dangerous allure of scapegoating. This wasn't just about killing a scholar. It was about sending a message. Hypatia's murder was a stark warning to those who dared to challenge the new order. It was a violent punctuation mark at the end of an era, a chilling reminder of what happens when reason gets trampled by fanaticism. The economic and political pressures of the time created a perfect storm where religion was weaponized to consolidate power. Of course, the myths surrounding Hypatia's death have their own morbid allure. Some stories paint her as a martyr for paganism, a last bastion of the old ways. Yet, the reality is far more complex. Hypatia wasn't fighting for paganism per se. She was fighting for intellectual freedom, for a world where knowledge wasn't shackled by dogma. Her story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of extremism and the fragility of progress. So, what's the takeaway here? Hypatia's murder wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a societal one. It marked the beginning of a darker age for Alexandria, a city that had once been a beacon of enlightenment. Her death underscores the destructive power of rumors and the peril of being caught in the crosshairs of political and religious strife. It's a timeless lesson in the dangers of fanaticism, a reminder that the cost of ignorance can be devastating. As we leave this chapter open-ended, consider this. Hypatia's legacy lives on, not just in the annals of history, but in the ongoing struggle for knowledge and freedom. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the courage it takes to stand for them. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into her impact and the ripple effects of her untimely demise in the final part of this journey. As we continue, let's take a detour down the winding roads of legacy and myth, a place where history meets Hollywood, and reality often takes a backseat to a great storyline. Hypatia's tale, as dramatic as it is enlightening, serves as a prime example of how legends are born, oftentimes with a little less truth and a little more flair than the original script. Her story has been retold in so many ways that truth and fiction are now as intertwined as a double helix, and it's time we try to unravel them. First, let's talk about how Hypatia's legacy has been molded over the centuries. The way her life and death have been depicted often reveals more about the time and culture doing the telling than about Hypatia herself. Take the 18th century Enlightenment thinkers, for instance. To them, she was the poster child for reason over dogma, a secular saint in an era that revered science and critical thinking. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and you see Hypatia being recast yet again, this time as a martyr in the fight for women's rights, a narrative that has only gained steam in our modern age. But let's not forget that each retelling, while adding layers of meaning, has often blurred the facts. Hypatia, as a feminist icon, is a compelling narrative, but it's crucial to remember that the ancient world didn't see her that way. She was a trailblazer, no doubt, but she wasn't rallying for women's suffrage. She was too busy pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Still, her story resonates with anyone who's ever felt the sting of societal constraints, making her a timeless symbol of intellectual freedom. And speaking of intellectual freedom, let's dive into her impact on modern science and philosophy. Hypatia's work laid some of the groundwork for future advancements, even if she didn't get the credit she deserved during her time. Her mathematical contributions, particularly her commentaries on Diophantus's Arithmetica, were like an ancient version of a viral TED talk, spreading ideas far beyond the walls of Alexandria. Fast forward a few centuries, and you can see echoes of her work in the Renaissance and Enlightenment, periods that cherish the classical knowledge she helped preserve. The irony here is richer than a Roman senator's toga. Hypatia, a pagan philosopher, has become a modern symbol in a world that has all but forgotten the gods she worshipped. Life is a testament to the enduring power of ideas, transcending the boundaries of time, culture, and even religion. Perhaps there's a bit of poetic justice in knowing that while her body was destroyed, her intellectual legacy remained untouchable, continuing to inspire generations. Now, let's address the myth-making machine that turned Hypatia into a larger-than-life figure. It's easy to see why her story captivates. It's got all the elements of a gripping drama: brilliance, betrayal, and a tragic end. But as we sift through the sands of time, it's evident that many narratives around her are more about the storytellers than about Hypatia herself. Romantic tales of her life often overshadow the harsh reality she faced, like the volatile political climate of Alexandria or the precarious balance she had to maintain as a woman in a man's world. In a sense, the myths are a mirror, reflecting the values and struggles of the societies that retell them. Hypatia's transformation from a historical figure into a feminist icon is not so much about who she was, but about who we want her to be. A beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance, an embodiment of the fight for knowledge in the face of ignorance. And let's be real, who doesn't love a good underdog story, especially when it's dressed in the robes of intellectual rebellion? So, what can we learn from Hypatia's enduring appeal? Perhaps it's the reminder that while history may be written by the victors, legends are crafted by the dreamers. Her story teaches us that the quest for knowledge is often fraught with peril, but also with profound possibility. Hypatia's life is a clarion call echoing through the ages, a call to challenge the status quo, to question what we're told, and to never underestimate the power of a curious mind. As we wrap up this journey through time, let's leave with a few sharp observations. First, the past is never as distant as it seems. It's a shadow that shapes the present, for better or worse. Second, while myths may embellish, they also enlighten, offering insights into the human condition and our perpetual search for meaning. And finally, Hypatia's story, with all its twists and turns, is a testament to the enduring power of intellect, a force that, even in the face of violence and ignorance, remains an indomitable flame lighting the path to enlightenment. So, as you drift off to sleep, let Hypatia's legacy linger in your mind, a reminder that knowledge is not just a collection of facts, but a powerful tool for shaping the world. Her story is a testament to the idea that while we may not all carve our names into the annals of history, we can still contribute to the great tapestry of human progress. And in that sense, Hypatia's life, with all its brilliance, tragedy, and irony, is not just a story from the past, but a beacon for the future. In the grand symphony of history, where empires rise and fall like notes on a cosmic sheet, the Byzantine Empire struck a chord that resonated for over 1,000 years. And it all kicked off when a guy named Constantine, who clearly wasn't content with just being the first Christian emperor of Rome, decided in 330 AD to plant the seeds of a new Rome on the banks of the Bosporus. Talk about a power move. Now, why Constantinople? Well, it wasn't because Constantine had a fondness for Turkish delight. The location was a strategic gold mine. Situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, it was the ancient equivalent of putting your lemonade stand at the busiest intersection in town. The Byzantine capital controlled key trade routes between the Aegean and Black Seas, meaning it could charge a toll on just about every merchant and sailor passing through. Cha-ching. Economically, it was the jackpot. But let's get one thing straight. Calling Byzantium merely a sequel to Rome is like saying Led Zeppelin was just another band because they played rock music. Sure, it started with a Roman foundation, but Byzantium had its own groove. This wasn't just a Roman redux. It was more like a cultural remix. The Byzantines spoke Greek, not Latin, and their brand of Christianity was distinctly Eastern Orthodox. They weren't just Romans in fancy tunics. They were a whole new cultural entity with their own traditions, art, and a slightly unnerving obsession with mosaics. Constantine himself was a bit of a visionary. He saw the writing on the wall. Rome was getting a bit too big for its gladiator sandals, and the Western Roman Empire was a ticking time bomb. By shifting the empire's focus eastward, he hoped to stave off the chaos that eventually engulfed Rome in 476 AD. Spoiler alert, he was right. The Western Roman Empire crumbled faster than a cookie in milk, while Byzantium strutted into the Middle Ages like it owned the place. When Constantinople rose from the ground, it wasn't just about politics or economics, though. It was also a cultural beacon, a shining city on a hill that drew scholars, artists, and philosophers like moths to a flame. The Hagia Sophia, for instance, was more than just a building. It was an architectural flex that shouted, "Look what we can do." Completed in 537 AD, this enormous cathedral wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement of Byzantine ingenuity and a testament to their flair for the dramatic, with a dome that seemed to float on a halo of light. Let's not forget the city's defensive prowess. The legendary Theodosian walls were like the medieval version of a "Do Not Disturb" sign. Spanning nearly 12 miles and fortified with towers, these walls helped fend off countless sieges over the centuries. Think of them as the original Fort Knox, only with less gold and more arrows. Of course, not everything in Byzantium was as shiny as its mosaics. The empire had its share of squabbles and scandals. Emperors came and went, some leaving behind legacies of glory, others more akin to dumpster fires. And while the Byzantines liked to think of themselves as the torchbearers of Roman civilization, they were also dealing with an identity crisis. They called themselves Romans, but their neighbors saw them as something entirely different, a testament to their unique blend of old and new. So, while the romantic notion of Byzantium as a continuation of Rome has its appeal, the reality is far richer and more complex. It was a civilization that stood at a crossroads, both geographically and culturally, and it carved out an identity that was uniquely its own. As we delve deeper into the Byzantine saga, remember, this was no mere echo of Rome's grandeur, but a symphony in its own right, full of crescendos, clashes, and those occasional bum notes that make history so wonderfully human. So, while our heads were spinning from the Byzantine roller coaster of culture and chaos, enter Justinian I, the emperor who made sure his name would be remembered, whether for better or worse. Justinian wasn't just any emperor. He was the guy who looked at the Byzantine Empire and thought, yeah, let's make this the zenith of civilization. No biggie. His ambition was colossal, and he had the audacity to back it up with action. We're talking about a ruler who wanted to reunite the Roman Empire, revamp the legal system, and leave behind buildings that would have even the guards nodding in approval. First, let's tackle his grand rebuilding campaign. It wasn't just about patching up a few holes in the metaphorical wall. Justinian was on a mission to resurrect Rome's glory. He called it Renovatio Imperii, or the restoration of the empire, and boy, did he go all in. His campaign stretched the empire's borders to their most extensive reach since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. For a while, it seemed like Rome was back, baby. But of course, these military ambitions didn't come cheap. The empire's coffers were practically weeping from the strain, and the citizens weren't exactly thrilled about the heavy taxes. But hey, nothing screams empire like a hefty tax bill, right? Yet, Justinian's legacy isn't just about conquests and coin, it's also about some serious urban development. Enter the Hagia Sophia, the architectural wonder that still leaves visitors today wondering how on earth they pulled it off. Completed in 537 AD, this was no ordinary church. It was the empire's magnum opus, a building so grand that it made other churches feel like garden sheds. The dome alone was a spectacle, seemingly defying gravity as it floated above, supported by nothing but divine intervention, or so it seemed. The price tag for this masterpiece, around 320,000 pounds of gold, a sum that could buy entire kingdoms back then. Was it worth it? Well, if you consider that it's still standing today, attracting millions of awestruck tourists, you might say yes. But if you were a Byzantine taxpayer in 537 AD, you might have had a different opinion. But before we get too starry-eyed about domes and military victories, let's talk about one of the less glamorous aspects of Justinian's rule, the Nika riots of 532 AD. Picture this. Constantinople, the beating heart of the empire, in utter chaos. It all started with a chariot race, the Byzantine equivalent of a Super Bowl, where the blues and the greens, the two major chariot racing factions, decided that team spirit should involve some light rioting. What began as a sports brawl quickly escalated into a full-blown rebellion against Justinian's rule. Suddenly, the emperor found himself facing the prospect of being ousted by an angry mob. The riots lasted a week, left half the city in ashes, and claimed thousands of lives. It was a wake-up call that Justinian's reign wasn't as unshakable as his ambitions. Enter stage left, Theodora, Justinian's wife, and the empress who proved that you don't need a royal pedigree to rule like a boss. Her story reads like a rags-to-riches tale that would give Cinderella a run for her money. Theodora was an actress before she caught Justinian's eye. a profession that wasn't exactly held in high regard in Byzantine society. But she wasn't just a pretty face. Theodora was a sharp political operator who played a crucial role during the Nika riots. While Justinian was contemplating a discreet exit strategy, it was Theodora who famously declared she would rather die an empress than live in exile. Her grit and determination persuaded Justinian to stand his ground, ultimately saving his throne. Theodora's influence extended beyond crisis management. She championed women's rights, pushing for laws that prohibited trafficking and expanded women's property rights. Not too shabby for someone who started her life on the fringes of society. Yet her rise to power wasn't without its critics. The Byzantine elite wasn't exactly thrilled about an empress who had once been an actress, but Theodora didn't let their disdain slow her down. She redefined what it meant to be an empress, proving that a background in entertainment could indeed translate to political savvy and leadership. So, as the dust settled on the riots, and the empire continued its dance with destiny, Justinian and Theodora emerged as a power couple whose influence would echo through the ages. Their reign was a tapestry of triumphs and tribulations, a reminder that even within the grandeur of an empire, the stories of individuals can shape the course of history. As we leave Justinian's Constantinople, the empire stands poised on the cusp of further transformation. The stage is set for new challenges and characters, as the Byzantine saga continues to unfold in all its captivating complexity. As the stage lights dim on Justinian and Theodora's grand production, the Byzantine Empire finds itself in a new act, a turbulent one, bristling with challenges that would make even the most seasoned drama queens raise an eyebrow. Enter the 7th and 8th centuries, where the empire faced threats that were anything but scripted. The rise of Islam swept across the Arabian Peninsula faster than you can say caliphate, and suddenly the Byzantines were no longer the biggest kids on the Mediterranean block. Picture this. It's the early 630, and the Byzantine Empire is recovering from a bruising war with the Sasanian Empire of Persia, a conflict that had more twists and turns than a soap opera. Just as they were picking up the pieces, along comes a new contender, Islam, led by a passionate and united Arab force. By 634, the Byzantines were already feeling the heat with the loss of their province of Syria. This wasn't just a casual land swap. It was a seismic shift. Syria was a strategic linchpin, a bustling hub of trade and culture that connected the empire to the east. Losing it was akin to having the rug pulled out from under them, and the hits kept coming. By 637, Jerusalem fell, and by 642, Egypt was under Islamic control. Egypt, the granary of the empire, the breadbasket that fed Constantinople's ever-hungry population, was gone. Talk about a gut punch. The economic ramifications were enormous. With the loss of these territories, the Byzantine Empire's tax revenue shrank faster than a wool sweater in a hot wash. The empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now on the defensive, scrambling to protect what was left of its domain. If external pressures weren't enough, the Byzantines also found themselves embroiled in a little domestic squabble known as the iconoclasm. Cue the 8th century, where, believe it or not, the empire nearly tore itself apart over religious art. Yes, art. Who knew that images of saints and Christ could spark such fervor? But in Byzantium, they didn't just debate theology. They lived it with all the intensity of a reality show reunion episode. The term iconoclasm literally means breaking of images, and that's exactly what happened. The movement kicked off in 726 under Emperor Leo Roman III, who decided that religious images were a form of idolatry. Now, Leo wasn't just being a killjoy. He genuinely believed that the use of icons had incurred divine wrath, citing military defeats as evidence. His solution? Ban them. And what followed was the Byzantine version of an art purge, where smashing icons became the order of the day. But not everyone was on board. Many Byzantines loved their icons like some folks love their celebrity crushes, and they weren't about to let this slide. The empire split into two camps, the iconoclasts, who supported the ban, and the iconodules, who believed that icons were essential to their faith. What started as a theological debate quickly escalated into a political and social maelstrom, with both sides going at it like cats and dogs, or perhaps monks and bishops. Iconoclasm wasn't just a spiritual affair. It was a political power play. monasteries, which were wealthy and influential, were staunchly pro-icon. By targeting icons, the emperors also aimed to curb the power of the monastic institutions. It was a classic case of follow the money, as the state sought to consolidate power by clipping the wings of the church. The conflict raged for over a century, with periods of relative calm interrupted by bouts of fervent destruction and restoration of icons. It wasn't until 843 that the controversy was finally put to rest with the restoration of icons, celebrated annually in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the triumph of orthodoxy. So, what did all this theological turbulence mean for Byzantium's identity? Well, it was a crucible, a trial by fire that forged a more resilient, albeit fractured, empire. The Byzantine state had to become leaner and meaner, adapting to its reduced size and resources. The loss of key territories forced a shift in focus from grand conquests to consolidation and defense. The Byzantines became adept at using diplomacy and strategic marriages to keep their enemies at bay, like a medieval game of chess where losing a pawn could mean the difference between stalemate and checkmate. The empire's military, once stretched across vast territories, had to adjust to its new reality. The Byzantine army became more localized, with the establishment of themes, or military districts, each responsible for its own defense. This system, though not without its flaws, provided a more sustainable model for the empire's defense, ensuring that it could withstand prolonged sieges and invasions. Despite the internal strife and external pressures, the Byzantines never lost sight of their unique identity, a blend of Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian faith. This identity, constantly evolving and adapting, was both a shield and a sword, protecting the empire from disintegration while also driving it forward through the centuries. In the grand theater of history, the Byzantine Empire's 7th and 8th centuries were a masterclass in resilience. They weathered the storm of Islamic expansion and navigated the treacherous waters of iconoclasm, emerging battered but unbowed. As the curtain falls on this act, the empire stands poised for another turn in its epic saga, a testament to the enduring spirit that defined Byzantium, a spirit that would continue to echo through the corridors of history long after the empire itself faded into the annals of time. As the Byzantine Empire brushed off the dust from its earlier tribulations, the stage was set for a comeback tour known as the Macedonian Renaissance. Think of it as Byzantium's version of a rocky sequel, beaten but not broken, ready to reclaim its former glory with a 1-2 punch of military might and strategic diplomacy. The 9th century saw the rise of the Macedonian dynasty, a family that would steer the empire through stormy seas to calmer waters, all while grappling with a bureaucracy so convoluted that even Kafka would throw up his hands in despair. The Macedonian Renaissance wasn't just a fancy label slapped on a period of history. It was a full-blown revival. Spanning from 867 to 1056, this era saw a resurgence in art, culture, and intellectual life, alongside significant territorial expansion. Under the watchful eye of emperors like Basil I, the dynasty's founder, and Leo VI, known as the Wise, the Byzantines recaptured lands in the Balkans and parts of the Middle East. It was like hitting the historical reset button, restoring the empire to a semblance of its former self. Now, let's talk Basil Roman II, the guy with the charming moniker, Bulgar Slayer. Imagine him as the ultimate medieval action hero, complete with a steely gaze and a penchant for strategic brilliance. Basil Roman II reigned from 976 to 1025, and under his leadership, the empire reached its medieval zenith. Through a combination of military savvy and deft diplomacy, he solidified Byzantine influence and expanded its borders to their greatest extent since Justinian. If empire building were an Olympic sport, Basil would have nabbed gold. Basil's nickname wasn't just for show. His epic struggle against the Bulgarian Empire culminated in the Battle of Claudion in 1014, where his forces decisively defeated the Bulgarians. The aftermath was brutal. Basil allegedly blinded 99 out of every 100 Bulgarian prisoners, leaving the remaining one-eyed to lead the others home as a grim warning. It was a ruthless move, sure, but it sent a clear message: mess with Byzantium at your peril. Despite his fearsome reputation, Basil was a shrewd diplomat. He knew that military might alone couldn't keep an empire stable. Through a series of alliances and marriages, he managed to keep potential adversaries in check. His reign saw the stabilization of the eastern frontier with the Abbasid Caliphate, a feat accomplished not by swords, but by strategic marriages and treaties. Basil was the kind of guy who understood that sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword, especially when the ink involves matrimonial alliances. While Basil was busy expanding the empire and keeping its enemies at bay, the Byzantine bureaucracy was doing what it did best, being Byzantine. Byzantine administration was a maze of titles and offices that made modern-day government agencies look like minimalist startups. The bureaucracy was as Byzantine as it gets, pun intended. With layers of officials, each with a title longer than a CVS receipt, it was a system that prized complexity over clarity. It's no wonder that navigating Byzantine politics required a map, a compass, and a healthy dose of patience. This Byzantine labyrinth was both a strength and a weakness. On the one hand, it allowed the empire to exert control over its vast territories, ensuring that tax revenues flowed into Constantinople like a river of gold. On the other hand, it was a breeding ground for corruption and inefficiency, with court intrigue and backstabbing that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's story. It was a delicate balance, a high-wire act that required constant vigilance to maintain. Economically, the empire was thriving. The Byzantine gold solidus, a coin that had been in circulation since the days of Constantine, was the backbone of the empire's economy. Its stability and reliability made it the currency of choice for trade throughout the Mediterranean. The empire's strategic location meant that it continued to control key trade routes, raking in profits from merchants eager to move their goods between east and west. With trade came wealth, and with wealth came a flourishing of culture that would define the era. The Macedonian Renaissance wasn't just about military conquest or economic prosperity. It was also a time of cultural and intellectual revival. Byzantine scholars, artists, and theologians produced works that would echo through the ages. The empire became a beacon of learning, preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of the ancient world. Libraries were stocked with texts on philosophy, science, and medicine, ensuring that the Byzantine Empire remained a center of learning long after the Western Roman Empire had crumbled into the dust. But let's not get too lost in the romanticism of the era. The reality was that, despite these achievements, the empire faced constant challenges. Internal strife was never far below the surface, and the threat of external invasion lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. The empire's sheer size made it difficult to defend, requiring constant vigilance and a hefty military budget that strained its resources. The Macedonian dynasty's success was built on a foundation of strong leadership and strategic acumen. Yet, as the empire's fortunes rose, so too did the expectations placed upon its rulers. The pressure to maintain the status quo was immense, and any misstep could trigger a cascade of consequences that could unravel decades of progress. It was a precarious balance, one that required a deft touch and a steady hand to maintain. As the empire basked in the glow of its renaissance, the seeds of future challenges were already being sown. The Byzantine Empire's resilience and adaptability had seen it through countless trials in the past, but would it be enough to navigate the storms that lay ahead? Only time would tell. As we prepare to delve into the next chapter of this epic saga, remember, the story of Byzantium is one of triumph and tragedy, a tale as complex and multifaceted as the empire itself. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine roller coaster is far from over. With the Byzantine roller coaster barreling towards its grand finale, we're about to hit a few sharp turns. Buckle up as we delve into the epic saga of the Fourth Crusade and the eventual fall of Constantinople in 1453, a drama so intense it makes most soap operas look like a Sunday picnic. Let's kick things off with the Fourth Crusade, that infamous medieval road trip where Western Europe's knights, ostensibly headed to take back the Holy Land, got a bit lost along the way. Launched in 1202, the plan was to sail to Egypt, but things got a little haywire when the Crusaders realized they were short on cash. Enter Venice, the mercantile powerhouse that agreed to provide transport if the knights helped them seize the rival city of Zara. So instead of saving souls, the Crusaders were now debt collectors. But wait, there's more. After Zara, they set their sights on Constantinople, egged on by an exiled Byzantine prince who promised riches if they helped him reclaim the throne. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for anyone except the Venetians, who cashed in on the chaos. In April 1204, the Crusaders stormed Constantinople, and what followed was a 3-day orgy of looting, destruction, and general mayhem. Think of it as a medieval Black Friday, but with swords and less decorum. Priceless relics were carted off to Western Europe, and the Byzantine Empire was left a shadow of its former self. The sack of Constantinople was like a dagger to the heart of Byzantium, and the empire never truly recovered. It was a stark reminder that sometimes your greatest threats come not from enemies, but from so-called allies who didn't quite grasp the concept of reading the room. Fast forward to 1453, and the Byzantine Empire, once the crown jewel of Christendom, is more like a tarnished trinket. By this point, the empire consisted of little more than the city of Constantinople itself and a few surrounding territories, all under constant threat from the Ottomans. Enter Mehmet Roman II, the Ottoman Sultan with big dreams and even bigger cannons. In April of that year, he laid siege to the city with an army of about 80,000 men and a fleet that blocked off any hope of outside assistance. Constantinople's defenders, numbering around 7,000, were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, with their fate hanging by a thread. The deciding factor, a massive cannon, crafted by a Hungarian engineer named Urban, that hurled 600-pound stone balls at the Theodosian walls. These technological marvels were the medieval equivalent of a battering ram on steroids and made short work of the city's defenses. When the final assault came on May 29, 1453, the walls finally gave way, and the Ottomans poured into the city. Emperor Constantine Roman XI died fighting, and with his fall, so too fell the last vestiges of the Roman world. Yet, as the dust settled on the ruins of Byzantium, its legacy was far from dead. The Byzantine Empire had been a crucible of culture, a melting pot where Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian theology mingled and evolved. Byzantine law, particularly the Justinian Code, would later influence legal systems across Europe, proving that good laws, like fine wine, only get better with age. In art, the Byzantine style, characterized by its iconic mosaics and religious iconography, would go on to inspire the Renaissance, as artists looked eastward for inspiration. And let's not forget the Byzantine Church, whose theological debates and schisms gave birth to the Eastern Orthodox Church, a major branch of Christianity that thrives to this day. Byzantium wasn't just a crumbling empire. It was a bridge between antiquity and the modern world. Its fall marked the end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of a new era, as scholars and refugees fleeing the city brought their knowledge and manuscripts to the West, fueling the intellectual fire that was the Renaissance. Though Constantinople fell, its spirit lived on, a testament to the enduring power of ideas over the transient nature of empires. In the end, the Byzantine Empire was more than a series of dates and battles. It was a beacon of human achievement, a reminder that even in decline, its influence was anything but by the way. So, as we close the chapter on the Byzantine Empire, let's remember that history is more than just the rise and fall of great powers. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and above all, the indomitable human spirit. Byzantium may have crumbled, but its legacy endures, woven into the very fabric of our world today. And that, dear listener, is the true mark of an empire that, despite its trials and tribulations, refused to fade quietly into the night. In the bustling corridors of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were the lifeblood of empires, a young man named Hammurabi was busy plotting his rise to power. If you think his story starts with him being plucked from obscurity, you're barking up the wrong ziggurat. Hammurabi didn't exactly crawl out of the mud to become king. He was more like the heir to a modestly sized realm, with Babylon as his playground, a city that wasn't quite the powerhouse it would become under his rule. The year was 1792 BCE, and Babylon was just one of many city-states vying for dominance. The geopolitical scene was as chaotic as a Game of Thrones episode, with alliances as fragile as a Mesopotamian clay tablet. Hammurabi's dad, Sin-Muballit, was king before him, which means our boy Hammurabi had a bit of a head start. Not exactly the rags to riches tale that makes for a blockbuster, but hey, every legend starts somewhere. Now, don't be fooled by the romantic imagery of Hammurabi as an all-wise, benevolent ruler writing laws under the shade of a date palm. His ascent was less about divine inspiration and more about shrewd political maneuvering. Babylon was strategically placed smack dab in the middle of trade routes, a bit like the ancient world's equivalent of a prime piece of real estate near a freeway exit. And Hammurabi, ever the opportunist, saw potential where others saw chaos. He wasn't just inheriting a crown, he was stepping into a pressure cooker of rival kings, each with an itchy trigger finger. Well, if they had triggers back then. You had the likes of Larsa, Eshnunna, and Assyria circling like vultures. But Hammurabi had a knack for alliances, like a master chess player who keeps his rook protected while plotting a checkmate. Instead of diving headfirst into war, he did what any sensible ruler would do. He bided his time, made nice with his neighbors, and built up Babylon's strength. Hammurabi's first moves were less about glorious battles and more about economic muscle. He fortified Babylon, expanded its agriculture, and improved infrastructure, all of which were the ancient equivalent of flexing those fiscal muscles. He ensured the canals were in tip-top shape, because in the desert, water was worth more than gold. Heck, in this era, it was probably worth more than Bitcoin. Hammurabi's strategic patience paid off when he finally took the gloves off in a series of military campaigns. But before swinging his sword, or whatever weapon was in vogue at the time, he secured alliances like a skilled poker player amassing chips for the final showdown. A little here with Mari, a little there with Kish, and soon he was ready to make Babylon the envy of the ancient world. Now, let's debunk a little myth while we're at it. The notion that Hammurabi was some lone genius who single-handedly dragged Babylon up by its bootstraps is about as accurate as a map drawn by a blindfolded cartographer. He had a capable team, advisors whispering in his ear, and a cadre of officials keeping the wheels turning. It's just that Hammurabi, with his charisma and knack for diplomacy, was the face of the operation. In a world where alliances shifted like sand dunes in a storm, Hammurabi's real genius was in knowing when to strike and when to sip date wine with the neighbors. He played the long game, and it paid off, setting the stage for Babylon not just as a city of bricks and mortar, but as a symbol of innovation and power. His rise was a masterclass in strategy, patience, and a touch of opportunism, qualities that would soon help him etch his name into history as the Lawgiver of Babylon. As Hammurabi stood on the precipice of history, poised to transform Babylon into a powerhouse of law and order, he wasn't just playing the part of an ancient superhero. His real legacy was as a legal visionary, with a knack for turning chaos into order through the infamous Code of Hammurabi. Picture this: 282 laws meticulously etched onto a 7-foot-tall basalt steel, like an ancient version of a terms and conditions agreement, but one you definitely couldn't just scroll through and click, "I agree." Now, these weren't just any rules. We're talking everything from the sublime to the downright bizarre. Hammurabi's code covered topics as varied as property rights, trade regulations, family law, and even the consequences of ox-related mishaps. Yes, you heard it right. If your neighbor's ox got a little too frisky and trampled your crops, there was a law for that. This was a society where livestock had legal implications, unlike today where your biggest concern might be whether your pet gets enough Instagram likes. The code was revolutionary for its time, a beacon of structured governance, in an era when disputes could quickly escalate from a minor spat to something that looked like a scene out of a reality TV showdown, minus the cameras, but with actual stakes like, say, your life. Hammurabi wasn't just legislating. He was laying down the foundation for a society that valued order over chaos, a legal framework that made Babylon a place where you could, theoretically, live without worrying that your neighbor might challenge you to a duel over a misplaced goat. But let's not get too carried away with the romanticism. While Hammurabi's legal masterpiece was groundbreaking, it also had its fair share of quirks and limitations. For one, the code was notoriously harsh. Ever heard the phrase, "an eye for an eye"? That's Hammurabi's handiwork, and it wasn't just metaphorical. Mess up someone's eye, and you might find yourself with a patch over yours, courtesy of state-sanctioned justice. The code had a particular fondness for retribution, reflecting a society where personal vengeance was tempered by legal proceedings, albeit proceedings that would make Judge Judy look like a pushover. Adding a dash of economic insight, the code also reveals a society deeply concerned with commerce and property. Laws about trade were as detailed as they were draconian. If a merchant tried to pull a fast one, they'd face consequences that were about as lenient as a hangry Sumerian. This wasn't just Hammurabi being harsh for harshness' sake. It was about maintaining trust in an economy that ran on trade routes snaking through the sands like ancient highways. Without clear rules, it'd be like trying to run a modern economy where everyone paid in monopoly money. And let's talk about the social stratification embedded in these laws. Not everyone was equal under Hammurabi's code, far from it. The punishments varied depending on your social status, with slaves and commoners getting the short end of the legal stick. This was less a blindfolded lady justice and more a tiered system where your social rank defined your legal outcome. It's a bit like modern tax brackets, but instead of owing money, you might owe a body part. Yet, for all its brutality and inequities, the Code of Hammurabi was a monumental step forward. It was the first time laws were written down for public consumption, ensuring that everyone knew the rules of the game. It turned justice into a public affair rather than a private vendetta, a move that, despite its flaws, was astonishingly progressive for the era. Hammurabi might not have invented the concept of law, but he sure made it a headliner. So, while the code's justice might seem a tad harsh to our modern sensibilities, imagine getting your hands chopped off for theft. It's crucial to remember its context. This was a world where life was precarious, and a strong legal framework was like a sturdy life raft in a churning sea of unpredictability. It was less about fairness, as we understand it today, and more about stability and deterrence. In a sense, Hammurabi's code was a precursor to the complex legal systems we navigate today, albeit without the luxury of appealing to higher courts or hiring a slick lawyer to find loopholes. It laid the groundwork for the idea that laws should be knowable and predictable, a radical notion in a time when rulers could change the rules on a whim. Hammurabi wasn't just a king. He was a proto-bureaucrat, codifying a method to the madness of governance. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Hammurabi's reign, remember that his code was more than a set of laws. It was a statement, a declaration that Babylon was a place where order reigned supreme, where the whims of kings were replaced by the chisel of codified law. Sure, it was a bit rough around the edges, but it was a start, a crucial step in humanity's long, winding journey toward civilization. And while Hammurabi's laws might not win any awards for compassion, they did earn him a permanent spot in the annals of history as the Lawgiver of Babylon. Stay tuned, because Hammurabi's tale is far from over, and his impact echoes far beyond those ancient clay tablets. Now that Hammurabi had laid down the law like some ancient judge dread, it was time to take a peek at his military ventures, the part of his CV that reads more like a blockbuster script than a historical footnote. You see, the romanticized image of Hammurabi as a valiant warrior king galloping into battle on a noble steed is a bit like the trailer for a movie that skips over all the bloopers. Sure, he expanded his empire, but it wasn't all heroics and trumpets. First, let's set the stage for his conquests. Hammurabi's empire wasn't a seamless patchwork of friendly neighbors. It was more like a chessboard where each city-state was a potential pawn or foe. By the time he flexed his military muscles around 1760 BCE, Babylon was ready to rumble. But here's the kicker. He didn't just go charging in with swords raised. Oh no, Hammurabi was more the death by 1,000 cuts kind of guy. He strategically weakened his rivals through a mix of alliances, espionage, and good old-fashioned intimidation. If there were a Mesopotamian handbook titled Conquest for Dummies, Hammurabi would have written the foreword. His military campaigns were less about brute force and more about clever tactics and opportunistic timing. Take his conquest of Larsa, for instance. Larsa was a city-state that stood in his way like an ancient speed bump. Hammurabi waited until Larsa's king, Rimsin, was busy with internal strife and external threats. Then, like a seasoned poker player with a killer hand, he moved in for the win. It was 1763 BCE when Babylon took Larsa under its wing, and Hammurabi didn't even break a sweat. Let's talk about logistics for a moment. Managing an army in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't exactly a walk in the hanging gardens. The region's geography was as forgiving as a grumpy Sumerian after a bad barley harvest. We're talking marshlands, deserts, and unpredictable rivers making troop movements a nightmare. The average soldier had to march hundreds of kilometers, often hauling equipment that felt more like moving house than going to war. And here's a fun thought. Imagine trying to coordinate a campaign when your fastest messenger might be a guy on a donkey. Economic factors also played a massive role in Hammurabi's military success. Babylon's position as a trade hub meant it could finance campaigns like a Kickstarter for empires. This wasn't just a kingdom of warriors, but of traders and bureaucrats who knew how to squeeze every shekel from their economy. Hammurabi was like an ancient CEO who diversified his portfolio before launching a hostile takeover. His armies were well equipped, and his generals used intelligence and cunning rather than sheer numbers. But let's not paint Hammurabi's expansion as a series of smooth victories. There were plenty of comedic mishaps along the way. Picture an army setting up camp only to find themselves knee-deep in marshland because someone forgot to check the map, or a siege that dragged on because the battering ram broke and the closest carpenter was miles away contemplating life over his clay tablets. These hiccups were par for the course in ancient warfare, where miscommunication and misfortune were as common as sandstorms. Now, while Hammurabi's empire grew, so did the complexity of managing it. The larger the territory, the more cracks began to show. You see, ruling an empire is like juggling flaming torches. Drop one, and things can go south quickly. For Hammurabi, the challenge was maintaining control over diverse regions with distinct cultures, laws, and languages. His administration had to be as efficient as a Babylonian scribe, churning out orders and edicts faster than you can say cuneiform. Yet, despite the romanticized tales of a smoothly run empire, the reality was more like a precarious balancing act. Local governors sometimes acted more like rebellious teenagers than loyal subjects. Communication took ages, literally. By the time a message traveled from one end of the empire to the other, the situation might have changed more times than the Euphrates course. Hammurabi's expansion was also marked by his ability to integrate conquered peoples into the Babylonian fold. This wasn't a straightforward conquer and subdue affair. He had to be part diplomat, part enforcer, ensuring that newly acquired territories didn't just nod along, but actually contributed to the empire's prosperity. It's like convincing your new roommate to pay rent and not just crash on the couch. So, while the grand narrative of Hammurabi's conquests paints him as the quintessential warrior king, the truth is a tad more nuanced. He was as much a strategist as a soldier, a ruler who knew when to wield the sword and when to extend the olive branch. His military campaigns weren't just about expansion, but about creating a unified state that could stand the test of time, or at least a few generations. As we peel back the layers of Hammurabi's reign, it becomes clear that his military achievements were as much about brains as brawn. He orchestrated a symphony of strategy, logistics, and economic prowess that transformed Babylon from a city-state to an empire. But like all great empires, the seeds of its eventual decline were already being sown, even in the midst of its greatest triumphs. We're not done with Hammurabi yet. Oh no. There's more to this ancient saga as we explore the intricacies of his empire and the legacy that has echoed through the millennia. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the story of Hammurabi, the king who not only wrote the laws of Babylon, but also redrew the maps of Mesopotamia. As we dive deeper into Hammurabi's realm, let's peel back the clay tablets on his domestic policies and see what made Babylon more than just a military juggernaut. Hammurabi wasn't content to let Babylon rest on its laurels, or its mud bricks for that matter. He envisioned a city that would rival any in Mesopotamia, not just in terms of military might, but as a hub of trade, innovation, and urban planning. You could say he was the original city planner, long before city councils made it a bureaucratic nightmare. Under Hammurabi's reign, Babylon became the ancient equivalent of a bustling metropolis, albeit one with fewer coffee shops and more ziggurats. His infrastructure projects were ambitious, to say the least. He was like a Mesopotamian Bob the Builder, minus the hard hat. One of his crowning achievements was the expansion and maintenance of the canal systems. In a region where water was more precious than a rare Parkhamen card, Hammurabi ensured that Babylon's canals were as efficient as a well-oiled chariot. These waterways weren't just for irrigation. They were the arteries of trade, pumping lifeblood into the city's economy. Speaking of trade, Babylon's location was no accident. Nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates, it was the crossroads of the ancient world, drawing traders like moths to a flame. Hammurabi capitalized on this prime real estate by establishing trade networks that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. This wasn't just about swapping trinkets and spices. It was about securing Babylon's place as a commercial powerhouse. Picture a bustling market scene where merchants haggled over goods with the fervor of a Black Friday sale, only with more camels and fewer shopping carts. But running a city wasn't all grand designs and bustling bazaars. There were day-to-day realities that would make any modern mayor break out in a cold sweat. Imagine trying to manage a city where public sanitation was rudimentary at best. Sewers, more like ditches that occasionally did their job. And yet, Hammurabi's administration tackled these issues with the kind of determination you'd expect from someone who'd just discovered caffeine. They improved roads, repaired city walls, and even tackled the monumental task of waste management, though with less success than they might have liked. Let's just say that Babylon wasn't winning any awards for cleanliness. Now, let's talk about the social hierarchies that made Babylon tick. Hammurabi's code wasn't just a legal manual. It was a reflection of the society he governed. It laid bare the stark realities of class distinctions in Babylonian life. The social pyramid was as rigid as a scribe's stylus, with royalty and priests at the top, commoners in the middle, and slaves at the bottom. It was a world where your birth could dictate your destiny, like a cosmic game of snakes and ladders, where the dice were loaded. This stratification was woven into the economic strategies that powered Babylon. Taxes were collected with the precision of a Babylonian accountant, ensuring the state's coffers were as full as a temple storeroom during harvest. Hammurabi knew that a well-oiled bureaucracy was essential for maintaining order and prosperity. His officials were like the ancient world's version of civil servants, only with more clay tablets and fewer spreadsheets. Yet, for all the meticulous planning and grand visions, managing Babylon was a bit like herding cats, if those cats happened to be stubborn governors and resource-hungry neighbors. Communication was slow, and decisions could take months to implement. It was a world where patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. And bureaucracy, oh, the bureaucracy. It was as eternal as the Euphrates itself. Imagine the paperwork, or rather the claywork, involved in running an empire. Each decree, each edict had to be meticulously recorded, stored, and if you were lucky, retrieved without crumbling into dust. Hammurabi's officials were like the original data entry clerks, only their computers weighed a lot more. But let's not forget the human element in all this. For every grand plan, there were the everyday folks trying to eke out a living under Hammurabi's watchful eye. Farmers tilled the fields, artisans crafted goods, and traders plied their wares, each contributing to a vibrant economy that was as diverse as the city's population. It was a city of contrasts, where the opulence of the royal courts coexisted with the simplicity of the commoner's home. So, while Hammurabi's Babylon might not have been a utopia, it was a city that thrived on innovation and adaptability. It was a place where the past and the future collided in a cacophony of voices, a testament to the enduring spirit of a civilization that dared to dream big. And as we continue to unravel Hammurabi's legacy, remember that his achievements were as much about the people he governed as the laws he laid down. The story of Babylon is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more revelations about this ancient wonder of the world. Stay tuned, because Hammurabi's tale is still unfolding, and there are more secrets to uncover in the sands of time. So, as we wrap up our whirlwind tour through Hammurabi's Babylon, let's take a breather and examine the legacy of this ancient maestro of governance and law. Was he the omnipotent demigod that some tales would have you believe? Probably not. But he was a game-changer, no doubt about it. For starters, let's talk about that legendary code of Hammurabi, because you can't really discuss his legacy without bringing up that iconic 7-foot stele. The code wasn't just a list of do's and don'ts to keep Babylon from descending into chaos. It was a revolutionary manifesto that echoed through the halls of history. Imagine laying the groundwork for legal systems that would influence civilizations for millennia. That's like inventing the wheel and watching it roll all the way to the Supreme Court. Hammurabi's laws didn't just put Babylon on the map. They carved it into the stone tablets of legal tradition. Sure, some of those laws were harsher than a Babylonian summer, but they set a precedent. That law should be predictable and public, not the whimsy of a capricious ruler. Now, let's debunk the idea that Hammurabi was some sort of ancient superhero who conquered and ruled with effortless grace. In reality, he was more like a skilled conductor leading a very complicated orchestra. His reign was a symphony of strategic alliances, economic foresight, and yes, a fair bit of military muscle. But he wasn't striding across Mesopotamia like a demigod. He had to deal with the same headaches that any leader faces, managing resources, quelling rebellions, and keeping the lights on in an empire that stretched across modern-day Iraq. Politically, Hammurabi was a master at playing the long game. His knack for diplomacy wasn't just a talent, it was a survival tactic. He knew that even the mightiest empire could crumble faster than a clay tablet in a rainstorm if it didn't have a solid foundation of alliances. So he made sure Babylon was not just a city of power, but of partnerships. His was a reign where treaties were as valuable as horses, and where a well-timed alliance could be more effective than 1,000 soldiers. Economically, Hammurabi's administration was as savvy as it was shrewd. Babylon wasn't just a city. It was a thriving metropolis with trade routes that rivaled the Silk Road long before it was cool. Hammurabi understood that you couldn't have a strong empire without a strong economy. Trade was the lifeblood of Babylon, and ensuring those trade routes were safe was as crucial as the laws he etched into stone. Babylon under Hammurabi was more than a military powerhouse. It was a commercial juggernaut, a melting pot of cultures and goods that made it the envy of the ancient world. And let's not forget the social dynamics at play. Hammurabi's code didn't just reflect the society of his time, it enforced it. Sure, it was a tiered system that would make modern egalitarians cringe, but it was also a snapshot of life in ancient Mesopotamia. The laws codified a social order that was already in place, where your status could mean the difference between a fine and a less-than-pleasant physical penalty. It was a society where laws were as much about maintaining the status quo as they were about justice. But what's the modern takeaway from Hammurabi's reign? First off, the idea that law should be transparent and accessible is one that resonates even today. The notion that everyone, regardless of their status, should know the rules of the game is something that modern legal systems still strive for. Hammurabi's vision of a codified law was revolutionary, and it's one reason why his legacy still matters. The idea that the law is a public good, not a private weapon, is one that continues to guide democratic societies. Moreover, Hammurabi's story is a testament to the power of leadership that is as much about persuasion as it is about power. His ability to build and sustain an empire wasn't just about military might. It was about knowing when to flex that muscle and when to use a softer touch. Leadership, after all, is not just about issuing commands. It's about inspiring people to follow. Hammurabi was both a ruler and a visionary, a man who saw the potential in Babylon and had the audacity to make it real. And so, as we close the book on Hammurabi, let's give a nod to the duality of his legacy, both the myth and the man, the romanticized ruler and the gritty reality of his reign. His story reminds us that history is never just a series of dry facts. It's a tapestry of human ambition, ingenuity, and yes, a little bit of myth-making. So next time you hear the phrase an eye for an eye, remember that it's more than just ancient wisdom. It's the echo of a king who dared to dream big and etched that dream into the annals of history. Hammurabi's Babylon may be long gone, but its lessons are still very much alive, proving that sometimes the past has a lot more to teach us than we might think. Nestled on the North African coast, Carthage sat like a spider at the center of a web spun across the Mediterranean Sea. Now, before you roll your eyes at yet another ancient city described as a crossroads of civilization, hear me out. Carthage wasn't just a stop on the trade route map. It was the trade route map. Think of it as the Amazon of antiquity, minus the 2-day shipping, and with a lot more risk of pirate attacks. Back then, if you wanted to move goods east to west, you had to tango with Carthage. Founded around 814 BCE by the Phoenicians from Tyre, Carthage boasted a location that real estate agents would murder for. It sat on the cusp of the Tyrrhenian and Sardinian seas, with Sicily a stone's throw to the north. This geographic jackpot allowed them to control the choke points of Mediterranean commerce like a bouncer at an exclusive club. And they didn't just sit on this prime real estate collecting dust. They monetized it like nobody's business. But let's not romanticize these sea traders as some sort of ancient eco-warriors. They weren't sailing around just for the love of the ocean's breeze. Carthaginians were in it for the cold, hard cash, silver, gold, and all the shiny things that make the world go round. Their ships, sleek and fast, were like the FedEx of the day, zipping across the sea laden, with goods ranging from Iberian silver to tin from the British Isles, and the occasional passenger who could afford the fare. And let's not forget the purple dye, that luxury good so exclusive it was like the Gucci of the ancient world, extracted painstakingly from the murex snail. It was said to be worth its weight in silver, which, given the effort involved, sounds about right. Carthage's rise to trading prominence wasn't just about good geography and flashy products. They were also masters of maritime technology and innovation. Their fleets were legendary. With hundreds of ships at their disposal, the Carthaginians weren't just moving goods, they were moving empires. They built harbors that were marvels of engineering at the time, like their famous Carthon, a circular military harbor that was both practical and intimidating. Imagine a donut-shaped fortress that could house up to 220 ships, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. If naval supremacy were a game of chess, Carthage was playing with a stacked deck. Of course, all this success didn't come without its share of drama. Other powers weren't exactly thrilled that Carthage was raking in profits like a casino on a Saturday night. Their closest rivals were the Greeks, and later, the Romans, who were less than keen on Carthage's monopoly over Mediterranean trade. The Greeks, with their love for colonizing every island that could hold a goat, clashed with Carthage in a series of skirmishes that were less about ideology and more about who got to sell olive oil to whom. Despite these tensions, Carthage remained a master of diplomacy and negotiation, often playing one rival off against another to maintain their dominance. It's no wonder they were known as the phoenix of the sea, always rising from potential ashes, ready to take on whatever challenge came their way. But let's not sugarcoat things. They weren't exactly peace-loving merchants. They could be ruthless when it suited their interests, enforcing monopolies and exacting tolls with the kind of gusto that would make a modern-day highway authority blush. And just like any good story, there are myths to debunk. Take the tale of Dido, the legendary queen who supposedly founded Carthage by outsmarting a local king with a clever land deal involving an ox hide. Charming, right? But in reality, Carthage's establishment was more about strategic colonization and less about clever tricks. The Phoenicians knew exactly what they were doing when they picked that spot. It was no accident or stroke of genius, but a calculated move in the great game of Mediterranean commerce. As the centuries rolled on, Carthage continued to expand its reach, establishing colonies and trade posts throughout the Mediterranean. They were like the Starbucks of the ancient world, popping up anywhere there was an opportunity to caffeinate, or in their case, capitalize on local resources. Each new outpost was a node in their vast network, securing raw materials, new markets, and strategic alliances. This wasn't just trade. It was an early form of globalization, with Carthage pulling the strings. Yet, for all their cunning and commercial acumen, Carthage's success sowed the seeds of its own destruction. The more they expanded, the more they attracted envy and ire. The Romans, watching from across the sea with a mix of admiration and resentment, eventually decided enough was enough. But before we dive headlong into the epic confrontations of the Punic Wars, let's savor this moment of Carthaginian zenith. It was a time when the sea routes were theirs to command, when the world's wealth flowed through their ports, and when Carthage stood as a beacon of trade and power, a lighthouse on the edge of the known world, guiding ships and shaping history. And speaking of guiding ships and shaping history, let's dive right into what made Carthage the darling of ancient trade routes, the goods. Picture a Carthaginian ship gliding through the azure waters of the Mediterranean, its hull laden with treasures that would make a modern-day auction house salivate. We're talking about the kind of cargo that could bankroll a small kingdom, or at least a few Roman senators' weekend festivities. Carthage wasn't just peddling trinkets and baubles. No, their ships were packed with the heavy hitters of ancient commodities, precious metals, exotic spices, and luxury items that would have caused a riot at any Roman market. Take Iberian silver, for instance. This wasn't just pocket change. It was the backbone of Carthaginian trade. Mines in the Iberian Peninsula churned out silver like it was going out of style, and Carthage ensured it flowed into their coffers and eventually into the eager hands of their trading partners. According to ancient records, we're talking about thousands of tons of silver being transported annually. That's a lot of shiny stuff to keep the ancient world spinning. But let's not forget the spices. Oh, the spices. These were the real MVPs of ancient trade, the Instagram influencers of their day. Spices like cinnamon and pepper were worth their weight in gold, literally. Carthage sourced these aromatic wonders from as far as India, proving that their trade network was more global than your average multinational corporation. The logistics of this operation were no small feat. Imagine coordinating a supply chain that stretched across thousands of miles, with goods changing hands more times than a hot potato at a family reunion. It was the ancient equivalent of a just-in-time delivery system, minus the Silicon Valley buzzwords. And what about those fancy Roman villas we mentioned? These were the epitome of opulence, decked out with mosaics and frescoes that screamed, "Look at me, I'm wealthy." But behind every piece of exquisite art was a Carthaginian supply chain hard at work. Marble from Numidia, glass from Egypt, and timber from Lebanon. All these materials made their way through Carthaginian hands. The price tag on these villas, astronomical, considering the sheer volume of materials and manpower involved. It's estimated that the cost of outfitting a single villa could run into the equivalent of millions in today's money. Talk about living in style. Now, let's break down the economic muscle that Carthage flexed like a bodybuilder at a competition. Their trade volume was staggering, with some historians estimating that Carthaginian ports handled the equivalent of $1 billion in goods annually by today's standards. That kind of economic clout is enough to ruffle more than a few Roman togas. Carthage's ability to control the flow of goods meant they could dictate terms, prices, and even political alliances. It was like a game of chess, but instead of pawns and knights, they used silver and spices. So why did this get under Rome's skin? Well, imagine being the Romans, watching your neighbors across the sea grow wealthier and more influential by the day. It's like seeing your rival college's football team win the championship every year while you're stuck in a perpetual rebuilding phase. The economic disparity was glaring, and the Romans couldn't ignore it. Carthage's dominance wasn't just a financial inconvenience. It was a direct threat to Roman aspirations of Mediterranean supremacy. But let's not paint the Romans as the jealous underdogs in this narrative. They had their ambitions, and Carthage was simply in the way. The tension between these two powerhouses was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Carthage's trade routes were the veins through which the lifeblood of the Mediterranean flowed, and Rome wanted a piece of that action. It was a classic tale of envy, greed, and the relentless pursuit of power. In the grand tapestry of history, Carthage's trade empire was a masterpiece of economic strategy and maritime prowess. They weren't just traders. They were architects of a commercial network that spanned continents. And as we continue to unravel this story, remember that every coin, every spice, and every luxury item was a thread in the intricate web that Carthage spun. A web that would eventually draw in the Romans and lead to one of history's most epic confrontations. But we're not there yet. Stay tuned as we navigate the waters of Carthaginian commerce and set the stage for the inevitable clash with Rome. Now, as we're gearing up for the ultimate showdown between Carthage and Rome, let's cut through the fog of legend and get into the gritty details of how these two titans finally locked horns. We're talking about the Punic Wars here, folks, a series of conflicts that are as epic as they are complex. They make Game of Thrones look like a neighborhood squabble over a misplaced lawn gnome. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is this where Hannibal rides elephants over the Alps? And yes, it is. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The real story of these wars is a tangled web of alliances, betrayals, and some good old-fashioned geopolitical chess. First things first, why were Carthage and Rome at each other's throats? At its core, the conflict was a classic case of two alpha dogs trying to mark the same fire hydrant. Carthage had been the big kid on the Mediterranean block for centuries, but Rome was the scrappy newcomer with a chip on its shoulder and an ambitious eye on expansion. Both wanted control of Sicily, a strategically vital island that was the Mediterranean equivalent of Park Place on the Monopoly board. Whoever controlled Sicily controlled the key to Mediterranean trade routes. You can bet your bottom denarius that neither side was going to back down without a fight. So, the First Punic War kicks off in 264 BCE and lasts a whopping 23 years. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a marathon, not a sprint. It was a slugfest that saw both sides hammering away at each other, with neither gaining a decisive upper hand for quite some time. The Romans, who were not exactly known for their naval prowess back then, had to literally learn on the job. They started the war with a navy that was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. But necessity is the mother of invention, and the Romans got creative. They introduced the corvus, boarding device that turned sea battles into land battles, the kind of fight Roman troops knew how to win. It was a game changer, like when a tech company suddenly discovers how to monetize social media. Despite the innovation, the First Punic War was a costly affair. By its end in 241 BCE, Rome had finally edged out a victory, but not without paying a steep price. The Romans had lost around 700 ships and over 100,000 men, a staggering toll, even by the standards of ancient warfare. Carthage, licking its wounds, was forced to cough up an eye-watering indemnity of 200 talents of silver, equivalent to a cool $100 million today. Ouch. It was a hefty bill that would make even the most lavish of Roman senators hesitate before ordering that extra peacock for dinner. And while Carthage was busy dealing with its own internal strife, mercenary war, Rome wasn't exactly resting on its laurels. They were busy consolidating their gains, ensuring that Sicily was firmly under Roman control. Carthage, meanwhile, was down but not out. Enter Hamilcar Barca, the Carthaginian general with a name that sounds like he could have been a headliner at Woodstock. Hamilcar was a man with a plan, and that plan involved expanding Carthaginian influence in Spain. It was a shrewd move, aimed at rebuilding Carthage's economic and military power. Fast forward to 218 BCE, and we're on the brink of the Second Punic War. This is where Hannibal enters the stage, and yes, he does bring the elephants. But before we get all misty-eyed over the romantic image of a general crossing the Alps with a herd of pachyderms, let's dig into the reality. Hannibal's campaign was a logistical nightmare. The Alps were no walk in the park. They were treacherous, icy, and downright lethal. Of the estimated 50,000 troops and 37 elephants that started the journey, only a fraction survived the crossing. It was the ancient equivalent of a corporate restructuring, with personnel losses that would make any HR department cringe. Yet, despite the odds, Hannibal was a military genius. He spent the next 15 years rampaging across Italy, winning battles with the kind of strategic brilliance that would make Sun Tzu nod in approval. His victories at places like Cannae, where he decimated a Roman force twice the size of his own, are the stuff of legend. But here's the kicker. Hannibal never captured Rome itself. His campaign was a masterclass in tactical warfare, but it lacked the strategic knockout punch needed to end the war. Meanwhile, back in Carthage, the home front was struggling. The city was like a company hemorrhaging cash, while its star CEO was off on a business trip. Resources were stretched thin, and the economic toll was mounting. Carthage's trade network was disrupted, and the war effort was a financial black hole. It's estimated that the Second Punic War cost Carthage another 5,000 talents of silver, roughly $150 million today. Hannibal's brilliance on the battlefield couldn't make up for the fact that Carthage was bleeding money like a sieve. And let's not forget Rome's own struggles. The Romans might have had the resources of Italy behind them, but the war was draining. Hannibal's presence in Italy forced them to adopt a war of attrition, a strategy that, while ultimately successful, left scars. Roman farms were devastated, cities were sacked, and the economic impact was felt for generations. By the time the dust settled in 201 BCE, with Rome victorious and Carthage forced to sue for peace, both sides had paid dearly. With the signing of the Treaty of Zama in 202 BCE, Carthage was knocked out of the major leagues. They lost all their overseas territories, had to dismantle their navy to a mere 10 ships, and were slapped with an indemnity of another 10,000 talents of silver. Carthage was effectively reduced to a client state, a shadow of its former self. Yet, in a twist of historical irony, it was this very defeat that sowed the seeds for Carthage's eventual resurgence, an economic comeback that would have made Wall Street sit up and take notice. But let's not jump to the end just yet. The tale of Carthage and Rome is far from over. As we leave this chapter, remember that the Punic Wars were not just about battles and bloodshed. They were a fundamental clash of civilizations, an epic struggle that shaped the destiny of the Mediterranean and the world beyond. Stay tuned as we explore the aftermath of this colossal conflict, the lessons learned, and the path that led to Carthage's final showdown with Rome, the third and final act in this historic drama. Now, as we navigate the murky waters of post-war Carthage, let's peel back the layers of myth and see what's really cooking under the hood. The Treaty of Zama might have ended Hannibal's rampage, but it also left Carthage in a financial chokehold that would make any modern economist wince. Stripped of its empire and burdened with war debts that could rival a small country's GDP, Carthage was like a boxer on the ropes, trying to catch its breath while Rome tightened its grip. But here's the kicker. Despite being on life support, Carthage didn't just roll over and play dead. Oh no, they had a few tricks left up their sleeve. Their economy was like a cat with 9 lives, down but never out. They turned their focus inward, rebuilding their trade networks and revitalizing agriculture. Carthage became a hub for North African grain, a commodity that was as crucial to the Romans as Wi-Fi is to a millennial. It's estimated that by the mid-2nd century BCE, Carthage was exporting around 500,000 bushels of grain annually. That's a whole lot of bread and circuses, folks. Yet, despite these efforts, the Carthaginians were operating on borrowed time. Their resurgence was less of a phoenix rising and more of a desperate shuffle to stay afloat. The indemnity payments were a constant drain, and the political landscape was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Rome, ever the opportunist, was watching Carthage like a hawk, waiting for the slightest misstep. The Romans had a long memory and a short fuse when it came to their old rivals. Now, let's talk about the myth of the noble, tragic end. It's tempting to imagine Carthage as this valiant underdog, tirelessly fighting against the odds, but reality is a harsher critic. The truth is, Carthage bit off more than it could chew, and it was choking on its own ambitions. Their attempts to rebuild were bold, sure, but they were also reckless. Instead of maintaining a low profile, they engaged in economic activities that raised Roman eyebrows and hackles alike. It's like trying to rebuild your dream house in a neighborhood that's zoned for demolition. By 149 BCE, tensions had reached a boiling point. Carthage, in a moment of desperate bravado, defied Rome by taking up arms against Numidia, a Roman ally. Now, poking the bear is never a good idea, especially when that bear has a legion or two to spare. Rome declared war, and the Third Punic War commenced. This wasn't just a conflict, it was a death warrant for Carthage. Rome, led by the likes of Scipio Aemilianus, wasn't interested in half measures. They were out to erase Carthage from the map once and for all. The siege of Carthage was nothing short of a drawn-out ordeal. For 3 years, from 149 to 146 BCE, the city withstood a relentless Roman assault. Carthage was like a fortress of old, holding out against an inevitable tide. But the writing was on the wall. Starvation, disease, and relentless attacks took their toll. By the time the Romans breached the city, it was a shadow of its former self, more ghost town than thriving metropolis. And here's where the myth-busting really kicks in. The romanticized notion of Carthage as a noble martyr crumbles when faced with the stark reality of the situation. The city's downfall wasn't just a tragedy. It was a textbook case of overreach and hubris. Carthage's leaders had gambled big and lost even bigger. They failed to adapt to the changing political landscape and paid the ultimate price. In 146 BCE, Carthage fell, and Rome enacted a scorched earth policy that would make even the most ruthless conqueror pause. The city was razed, its population sold into slavery, and its land salted to ensure nothing would grow. The cost of Carthage's ambition was staggering, both in human and economic terms. It's estimated that the war and its aftermath saw the loss of over 200 000 lives, a grim reminder of the price of power. Yet, despite the destruction, Carthage's legacy endured. The Romans might have erased the city physically, but they couldn't wipe away its influence. The lessons of Carthage's rise and fall were etched into the annals of history, serving as a cautionary tale for future generations. Don't bite off more than you can chew, or you might just end up choking on your own success. As we leave the smoldering ruins of Carthage behind, let's not forget the bigger picture. This wasn't just a story of war and conquest. It was a reflection of human ambition and folly. The tale of Carthage and Rome is a timeless reminder that in the pursuit of power, there are no true victors, only survivors. And while Carthage may have fallen, its story continues to resonate, a beacon of both triumph and tragedy, casting its light across the ages. Stay with me as we prepare to explore the echoes of Carthage's legacy, the lessons learned, and the indelible mark it left on the world. The final act of this ancient drama is yet to unfold, promising new insights and revelations as we journey through the aftermath of Carthage's demise. The stage is set, the players are gone, but the story is far from over. As the dust settles on Carthage's once glorious empire, it's time to sift through the rubble and reflect on the echoes of its legacy. You see, the story of Carthage isn't just a tale of ancient woes, but a mirror reflecting the economic and geopolitical dramas that continue to play out today. The players may have changed, swapping togas for suits and ships for digital networks, but the stakes remain eerily similar. Let's start with the economics of it all. Carthage was the Jeff Bezos of its time, the master of a Mediterranean marketplace where tariffs were as complex as a Shakespearean plot. They understood that controlling trade routes was like holding the keys to the kingdom, and they weren't afraid to use them. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you'll find modern nations bickering over trade agreements like kids squabbling over the last slice of pizza. Whether it's tariffs on Chinese steel or disputes over fishing rights in the South China Sea, the echoes of Carthaginian trade strategy are loud and clear. Controlling the flow of goods is still a power play, as relevant today as it was when triremes cruised the Mediterranean. And what about those trade disputes? Carthage's scuffles with Rome were essentially ancient trade wars, fought not just with swords but with embargoes and blockades. Today, we've traded swords for sanctions, but the principle remains. Economic dominance often breeds conflict. Just ask any economist watching the simmering tensions between the U.S. and China. The Carthaginians understood that money talked, but they also learned the hard way that it could scream bloody murder when pushed to the brink. Now, let's tackle the myth-busting. Carthage has often been painted as the tragic hero in this Mediterranean saga, a noble city crushed by the Roman juggernaut. But the reality is more nuanced, like a Renaissance painting with a dash of modern graffiti. Carthage wasn't some innocent victim. They played the game of empire with the same ruthless ambition as their Roman counterparts. They overreached, underestimated their rivals, and paid the ultimate price. It's a tale as old as time. The bigger the ambition, the harder the fall. Yet, in their downfall lies a cautionary tale for modern powers. The Carthaginian experience reveals the fragility of economic empires built on shaky foundations. Rome's relentless pursuit of dominance was fueled by a desire to control not just territory but commerce. And while Carthage crumbled, Rome inherited the lesson that economic might is inseparable from political power. It's a lesson that resonates in today's world, where global powers jockey for economic supremacy, often at the expense of stability. So, what's the takeaway from Carthage's rise and fall? For one, it's a reminder that history is a relentless teacher, offering lessons that are as relevant now as they were in the days of Hannibal and his pachyderm parade. The story of Carthage isn't just about what was lost, but what was learned. It's a testament to the enduring power of trade as a driver of both prosperity and conflict, a double-edged sword if ever there was one. But let's not end on a somber note. Carthage's legacy, despite its fiery end, is a beacon of innovation and resilience. Their mastery of maritime technology and commerce laid the groundwork for future empires, and not just the Romans. The Carthaginian knack for turning adversity into opportunity is a lesson for any entrepreneur navigating the choppy waters of modern business. So the next time you're stuck in a traffic jam or bemoaning the latest stock market dip, spare a thought for the Carthaginians. They knew a thing or two about navigating uncertainty and making waves, both literally and figuratively. In the end, Carthage's story is a rich tapestry of ambition, hubris, and a dash of irony. It's a reminder that while the players may change, the game remains the same. The past is never truly past. It's a prologue to the present, offering insights and warnings for those willing to listen. So, as you drift off into sleep with visions of ancient ships and bustling markets, remember that the echoes of Carthage are all around us, whispering their timeless truths across the ages. In the bustling chaos of early Rome, where civilization was a toddler still learning to walk, kings ruled with the flair of rock stars on a world tour. These monarchs were the ancient equivalent of A-list celebrities, mixing grand gestures with scandalous exploits, but without the benefit of social media to spread their tales. However, the city was still a rough sketch of what it would become, more a collection of huts than a sprawling empire. Picture it as a small-town startup before it hit the big leagues. Enter Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or as his friends probably didn't call him, Tarquin the Proud. Now, this guy had a reputation that wasn't exactly glowing. He was the seventh and last king of Rome, and let's just say he had all the warmth of a Roman winter. Tarquin ruled from 535 BC to 509 BC, and his tenure was a masterclass in why absolute power might corrupt absolutely. He wasn't the type to take advice, preferring instead the solo act of power grabs and backstabbing. His reign was marked by a heavy-handed approach that made the Senate, a group of Rome's elders who liked to think of themselves as wise, more than a little uncomfortable. The seeds of change were sown in 509 BC, a year that would become a turning point in Roman history. Tarquin's downfall came not just from his tyrannical rule, but from a scandal that rocked the city to its core. It involved his son Sextus, who committed an unspeakable crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia. The fallout was as explosive as you'd expect, with Lucretia's death igniting a firestorm of public outrage. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the spark that lit the pyre of the monarchy. People were fed up with the Tarquin dynasty, and they were ready for something new. Enter Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who would lead the charge against Tarquin. Brutus wasn't just any noble. He was a man with a mission. He called for the expulsion of Tarquin and the establishment of a republic. The Romans, tired of being ruled by a family that seemed to think tyranny was a family value, rallied around Brutus. The Senate, once sidelined by Tarquin, now saw its chance to reclaim power. They abolished the monarchy with the zeal of a cleanup crew tackling the aftermath of a frat party. Thus, the Roman Republic was born, a system that would come to define Roman governance for centuries. But let's not romanticize this too much. The early Republic was less a well-oiled machine and more a jalopy held together by sheer determination. The Senate was comprised of patricians, the aristocratic class who believed they were born with the divine right to rule. These guys were like the grumpy uncles at a family reunion, always ready with a complaint and suspicious of anything remotely resembling fun. The transition from monarchy to republic didn't magically solve all of Rome's problems overnight. In fact, it introduced a whole new set of challenges. The power vacuum left by the ousted king meant that the Senate had to figure out how to govern without a single ruler calling the shots. They settled on a system of elected officials, with two consuls at the helm, each serving a one-year term to prevent any one individual from getting too comfortable. This was a clever move, kind of like having co-CEOs to keep each other in check. But here's the kicker. While the patricians were busy patting themselves on the back for ditching the monarchy, the plebeians, or common folk, were dealing with a harsh reality. The economic landscape was anything but rosy. The majority of Romans were farmers, and agriculture was the lifeblood of the economy. However, these farmers often found themselves in debt, subject to the whims of the wealthier class. If you couldn't pay your debts, you risked becoming a slave to your creditor, a fate worse than being stuck in a never-ending meeting. Social dynamics in early Roman society were anything but egalitarian. The patricians controlled the land, the wealth, and the political power, while the plebeians struggled to make ends meet. This imbalance was a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually lead to social upheaval and reforms. But in these early days, the plebeians were like a rock band in the making, still trying to find their sound and waiting for their big break. The Senate, meanwhile, was trying to keep things together. They were like referees in a chaotic game, trying to maintain order while everyone else seemed intent on breaking the rules. The challenge was to establish a system that allowed for both stability and flexibility, a task that was easier said than done. The Romans were navigating uncharted waters, and there was no roadmap for how to build a republic from scratch. Despite the rocky start, the transition from monarchy to republic was a significant achievement. It set the stage for Rome's future expansion and its eventual dominance over the Mediterranean world. The republic would evolve over time, grappling with internal strife and external threats, but it all began with the expulsion of a king and the determination of a group of Roman citizens to chart a new course. In the end, the story of Rome's transition from monarchy to republic is a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring human desire for self-governance. It's a tale of ambition, resilience, and the eternal struggle between the powerful and the powerless. And while we might chuckle at the antics of ancient kings and senators, their legacy is one that still resonates today, reminding us that the quest for liberty and justice is as old as civilization itself. As the Roman Republic took its first shaky steps into the world of governance, it quickly became apparent that Rome's new political landscape was more chaotic than a toga party at a college reunion. Patricians and plebeians were locked in a class struggle that made the Hatfields and McCoys look like a friendly neighborhood dispute. The patricians, those aristocratic few who thought they were born with a divine right to rule, held all the cards: land, wealth, and political clout. Meanwhile, the plebeians, the everyday Romans who actually made the city tick, were left holding the short end of the stick. Enter the struggle of the orders, a social conflict that raged like a Roman bonfire for over 2 centuries. This wasn't just a spat over who got the best seats at the Colosseum. It was a full-blown battle for rights and recognition. The plebeians, tired of being the underdogs in Rome's grand narrative, began to demand a greater say in the governance of their city. They wanted protection against arbitrary rule, and more importantly, they wanted to make sure they weren't left out in the cold when it came to laws and justice. The patricians, ever the political chess players, had a tight grip on the Senate and the positions of power. But they were also smart enough to know that an angry populace wasn't great for business. So, in a rare moment of compromise, or maybe just sheer self-preservation, they agreed to the creation of the 12 Tables in 450 BC. This was Rome's first attempt at a comprehensive legal code, a set of laws that were meant to be clear and accessible to all. Think of it as the ancient version of putting the rules of the game in writing so everyone could stop arguing over what was fair. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this Roman breakthrough. The 12 Tables were about as friendly as a porcupine at a petting zoo. Sure, they laid down the law, but they also reinforced the social hierarchy that kept the plebeians in their place. The laws covered everything from property rights to legal procedures and even funeral regulations. Yet they were also a reminder that the plebeians were still playing a game rigged in favor of the patricians. Take debt, for example. If you defaulted on your obligations, the repercussions were as pleasant as a Roman hangover. Creditors had the right to seize not just your assets, but also your person. Picture this. If you couldn't pay up, you might find yourself literally sliced up and divided among your creditors. Talk about a brutal form of bankruptcy. And while the 12 Tables did include some protections, like ensuring that trials were conducted in public, they were hardly a plebeian victory parade. The 12 Tables were inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed in the Roman Forum for all to see. This was Rome's way of saying, look, we're fair and transparent, though in reality it was more about maintaining control. The laws were there to be seen, but interpreting them was another matter entirely. The patricians, with their legal know-how and insider knowledge, still held the upper hand in the courts. It was like being given a map, but having no idea how to read it. Yet, for all its flaws, the creation of the 12 Tables was a seismic shift in Roman society. It was a step toward a more structured legal system and laid the groundwork for future reforms. The plebeians didn't stop at the 12 Tables. They continued to push for more rights, forming their own assembly and electing tribunes to represent their interests. These tribunes had the power to veto decisions that were against the interests of the common folk, a clever move that kept the patricians on their toes. Economic tensions also played a significant role in this ongoing drama. The backbone of Rome's economy was agriculture, and most plebeians were farmers. Yet they often found themselves at the mercy of the patricians, who owned vast tracts of land and controlled the resources. If a plebeian farmer had a bad harvest or faced unexpected challenges, debt was a constant threat, and with it, the risk of losing everything. Amidst this struggle, Rome's military campaigns added another layer of complexity. The Republic was expanding its territories, and military service was compulsory. Plebeians were called to serve, often leaving their farms and families behind. While serving Rome was a matter of pride, it also meant that many plebeians returned to find their lands neglected and debts mounting. It was a harsh reality that fueled the fire of discontent and kept the pressure on for change. The class struggle wasn't just about power and politics. It was about survival and dignity. The plebeians' fight for equality was a testament to their resilience and determination. They weren't just pushing back against the patricians' dominance. They were rewriting the rulebook of Roman society. The 12 Tables marked the beginning of a legal tradition that would influence not only Roman law, but also the legal systems of future civilizations. The story of the early Roman Republic is one of contradictions. It's about a society grappling with the ideals of justice and equality while entrenched in a system that favored the few over the many. The 12 Tables were both a tool of control and a beacon of hope, a symbol of the plebeians' struggle and the patricians' reluctant concession. And while the road to equality was long and fraught with challenges, the seeds of change had been planted. As Rome continued to evolve, the dynamics between the patricians and plebeians became a defining feature of its political landscape. The Republic's legal and social reforms set the stage for future generations, shaping the course of Roman history and leaving an indelible mark on the world. This was just the beginning of Rome's journey, a tale of ambition, conflict, and the enduring quest for a just society. Stay tuned, because the drama of the Roman Republic is far from over. As Rome marched ever forward, driven by a mix of ambition and sheer momentum, it found itself staring down the barrel of yet another conflict. Enter the Samnite Wars, a trilogy of skirmishes that played out like a blockbuster series with all the drama and twice the casualties. These wars, spanning from 343 BC to 290 BC, were less about the thrill of battle and more about strategic expansion. Rome wasn't just interested in collecting territories like stamps. It was building an empire, piece by calculated piece. The Samnites, a fierce group of hill warriors from central Italy, weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for Roman expansion. They were a tough crowd, as likely to offer a handshake as they were a spear. Yet, the Romans saw opportunity where others saw impasse. The Samnite territory was the gateway to the riches of southern Italy, and Rome wanted that key. But here's the kicker. These wars were as much about political maneuvering as they were about military might. Rome was perfecting the art of diplomacy, or what we might call today, a strategic charm offensive peppered with the occasional sword fight. Let's talk numbers for a second. The Second Samnite War alone saw Rome fielding armies that numbered in the tens of thousands, a logistical headache that would make even the most seasoned event planner break a sweat. But it wasn't just about boots on the ground. Rome knew that to win the war, it had to win the roads. Enter the Via, constructed in 312 BC under the watchful eye of Appius Claudius Caecus, the original road warrior. This wasn't just a path from point A to point B. It was a military superhighway, a direct line for moving troops and supplies with the efficiency of a Roman centurion on a caffeine rush. The Via stretched about 132 miles from Rome to Capua, and it was built with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker nod in approval. Forget about convenience for the average Roman citizen. This road was about projecting power, plain and simple. It was a clear message to the Samnites and anyone else who thought Rome was just another city-state playing dress-up. Rome was here to stay, and it was paving the way, literally, for its dominance. But while the roads were getting a facelift, the political landscape was also undergoing a transformation. Citizenship became the carrot on a stick that Rome dangled in front of its allies and conquered peoples. It was the ancient version of a membership card, offering benefits like protection and legal rights, but it came with strings attached. Rome was a master at this game, using citizenship to integrate diverse groups into the Roman fold, ensuring loyalty while expanding its influence. It was less about generosity and more about creating a cohesive empire where everyone knew who was boss. Now, let's sprinkle in some economic realities. Expansion wasn't just about waving flags and drawing new maps. It was a complex dance of land distribution and resource management. As Rome gobbled up territories, it had to figure out what to do with all that land. Enter the ager publicus, or public land, which was supposed to be distributed to Roman citizens. In theory, this was a great way to reward those who fought for the Republic, but in reality, it turned into a land grab by the wealthy elite. Imagine the patricians swooping in like seagulls at a beach picnic, snatching up the best plots while the plebeians were left with scraps. This land distribution, or lack thereof, sowed seeds of discontent that would grow into future conflicts. The plebeians, already juggling debt and military service, found themselves increasingly squeezed out of the land they helped conquer. It was a classic case of the haves versus the have-nots, a theme that would play out repeatedly in Rome's history. The economic boom that came with expansion was mostly a patrician party, and the plebeians, as usual, were left outside, listening to the revelry through closed doors. And while we're on the subject of mingling, let's not forget the Latin allies, Rome's frenemies who were often caught between a rock and a hard place. These allies provided crucial military support, but their loyalty was a delicate balance of coercion and cooperation. Rome was keen on keeping them close, offering limited citizenship as a sweetener, but never quite letting them into the inner circle. It was a relationship that worked, but only just, and it required constant maintenance to prevent it from teetering into rebellion. The Samnite Wars and the construction of the Via Appia weren't just milestones on Rome's road to glory. They were turning points that highlighted the Republic's growing pains. Rome's expansion was a double-edged sword, bringing wealth and power, but also exposing the cracks in its social and economic foundations. The Republic was a bit like a teenager experiencing a growth spurt, awkward, full of potential, but prone to stumbling over its own feet. As Rome continued to expand its reach, it also expanded its problems. The dynamics of power, citizenship, and land were the threads weaving through the fabric of Roman society, often pulling it taut to the point of tearing. Yet, through it all, Rome was learning, adapting, and evolving. The Republic was a living entity, shaped by the ambitions of its leaders and the resilience of its people. The Samnite Wars were more than just battles fought and won. They were a crucible in which the Roman Republic was tested and tempered. The lessons learned on the battlefield and in the Senate would resonate through the ages, laying the groundwork for Rome's transformation from a regional powerhouse to a global empire. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still plenty of drama to unfold in the saga of the Roman Republic, and as history has shown us, the road to empire is paved with ambition, conflict, and a fair share of potholes. Just when you thought Rome's expansion was an epic saga on its own, in waltzes the Punic Wars, ready to bring enough drama to make a soap opera look like a quiet afternoon nap. The Punic Wars were the gladiatorial matchup of the century, pitting Rome against Carthage in a series of 3 titanic conflicts between 264 BC and 146 BC. If you're wondering why these wars are considered a big deal, just imagine the Mediterranean as the boxing ring and Rome and Carthage as the heavyweight contenders, each vying for the title of undisputed master of the region. Let's kick things off with the First Punic War, 264-241 BC, a 23-year-long slugfest over the island of Sicily. At this point, Rome was like that kid who just learned to ride a bike and decided to enter the Tour de France. While Rome had a killer army that could march to the ends of the earth, its naval prowess was about as impressive as a fish trying to climb a tree. But necessity is the mother of invention, and the Romans were quick learners. They reverse-engineered a Carthaginian warship that had conveniently washed ashore, and voila, a navy was born. This was the ancient equivalent of finding a competitor's secret strategy manual lying around. Rome's newfound naval power wasn't just for show. It allowed them to tackle the Carthaginians head-on, culminating in the decisive Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BC. Here, Rome's fleet outmaneuvered Carthage's ships in a display that screamed, "We've got the hang of this sailing thing. Thank you very much." The victory forced Carthage to sign a peace treaty, ceding Sicily to Rome and coughing up a hefty indemnity that could have funded a small country's GDP. So, Rome got its first taste of Mediterranean dominance, and Carthage got a new dent in its pride. But wait, there's more. The Second Punic War, 218-201 BC, is where things really heat up, thanks to one man, Hannibal Barca. If there were a hall of fame for military geniuses, Hannibal would have a statue right at the entrance, complete with his iconic elephants. The guy was a tactical virtuoso, and his audacious march over the Alps with war elephants in tow was the ancient world's equivalent of a mic drop. This wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a statement, a bold, tusked proclamation that Carthage wasn't done yet. Hannibal's campaign in Italy was a masterclass in warfare. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BC stands out as a tactical masterpiece where Hannibal's forces, significantly outnumbered, encircled and decimated a Roman army of nearly 86,000 troops. Talk about a bad day at the office for Rome. Hannibal's strategy was so effective that it became the gold standard for military commanders for centuries to come. But here's the kicker. Despite his battlefield successes, Hannibal couldn't deliver the knockout punch to Rome. It's like he was playing chess, while Rome was playing a very stubborn game of checkers. Rome, ever the resilient underdog, adapted quickly. The Republic decided that if you can't beat them head-on, you can bleed them dry elsewhere. Enter Scipio Africanus, a Roman general who took the fight to Carthage's home turf in North Africa. The Battle of Zama in 202 BC was where Scipio outmaneuvered Hannibal, sealing Rome's victory in the Second Punic War. Carthage was left licking its wounds, forced to pay yet another round of reparations and surrender its fleet. Rome, on the other hand, strutted away with not just bragging rights, but also significant territorial gains. Now, let's talk about the cost of all this glory. The Punic Wars were not just about thrilling battles and strategic brilliance. They were also about the staggering human and financial toll. Rome lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers and citizens, and the economic impact was like a financial black hole. The wars drained the Republic's coffers, leading to increased taxation and a heavy reliance on slave labor to keep the economy afloat. The influx of slaves from conquered territories was a double-edged sword, fueling Rome's economy, while also sowing the seeds of future social unrest. The Third Punic War, 149-146 BC, though less glamorous, was the final nail in Carthage's coffin. By this point, Rome had decided that Carthage was like a pesky mosquito that needed to be swatted for good. The war was essentially a prolonged siege, culminating in the complete destruction of Carthage. When the dust settled, Carthage was left in ruins, and Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. But the victory was bittersweet. The spoils of war brought immense wealth, but also highlighted the growing divide between Rome's elite and the common folk. The rise of Roman naval power during the Punic Wars was a game-changer. Rome went from a landlocked powerhouse to a maritime juggernaut, commanding the seas with the confidence of a seasoned sailor. This newfound naval prowess allowed Rome to project power across the Mediterranean, securing trade routes and ensuring that everyone knew who was boss. But with great power came great complications. The influx of wealth and slaves from conquered territories destabilized the socio-economic balance, leading to increased tensions between the haves and the have-nots. Politically, the victories in the Punic Wars solidified Rome's path towards empire, but they also exposed the Republic's vulnerabilities. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few patrician families led to increased corruption and political infighting. The average Roman citizen, meanwhile, found themselves grappling with the harsh realities of an expanding empire, where the spoils of war often bypassed the common folk entirely. It was a classic case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss, where the promises of prosperity were often more illusion than reality. As the Republic basked in the glow of its victories, it had to contend with the reality that success on the battlefield didn't necessarily translate to stability at home. The political ramifications of the Punic Wars were far-reaching, setting the stage for the internal conflicts that would eventually rock the Republic to its core. The influx of wealth and slaves exacerbated economic inequalities, while the expansion of Roman citizenship to conquered peoples challenged the traditional social hierarchies. The Punic Wars were a defining moment in Roman history, a testament to the Republic's military might and strategic acumen, but they were also a reminder of the costs of ambition, both human and financial. Rome had achieved dominance, but it was a dominance fraught with challenges and contradictions. The Republic was now a heavyweight in the Mediterranean, but it was also a giant with feet of clay, vulnerable to the very forces it had unleashed. As we look ahead, Rome's triumphs and trials during the Punic Wars would echo through the ages, shaping the Republic's destiny and leaving an indelible mark on the course of history. Stay tuned, because the saga of Rome's rise and the inevitable fall is far from over. We've just scratched the surface of the drama, intrigue, and power plays that define the story of the Roman Republic. As the ink dried on Rome's treaties and the dust settled on Carthage's ruins, you'd think the Republic would be enjoying a well-deserved victory lap. But instead, the streets of Rome were buzzing with the low hum of discontent, like a beehive about to swarm. The Republic had expanded its borders, but in doing so, it had also blown open the doors to a host of internal problems that would make a soap opera look tame. Enter Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, the infamous Gracchi brothers, Rome's dynamic duo of reform and, some might say, political naivety. These brothers were the ancient world's version of reformist trailblazers, except their story ended less like a triumphant victory and more like a Shakespearean tragedy. Tiberius, the elder, took office as a tribune in 133 BC with a mission that was as noble as it was contentious: land reform. The Gracchi brothers saw the writing on the wall. Rome's rapid expansion had resulted in an economic disparity that was turning the city into a pressure cooker. Tiberius proposed the Lex Sempronia Agraria, a law aimed at redistributing public land, the Ager Publicus, that had been illegally occupied by Rome's elite. You know, the same patricians who treated land like a monopoly board and the plebeians like they were perpetually stuck on Baltic Avenue. Tiberius's reform was simple: limit the amount of land a single individual could hold and redistribute the excess to landless citizens. It wasn't exactly revolutionary, but it was enough to make the Senate's collective toga get in a twist. The Senate, unsurprisingly, wasn't thrilled about having their land dealings scrutinized, and they responded with all the grace of a cornered lion. Tiberius, undeterred, took his proposal directly to the people, bypassing the Senate entirely, a bold move that was about as popular as suggesting a vegan menu at a Roman feast. The Senate wasn't just miffed, they were incensed, and when Tiberius ran for a second term as tribune, which was as controversial as wearing socks with sandals, the Senate decided enough was enough. In 133 BC, they unleashed a mob that clubbed Tiberius and 300 of his supporters to death in broad daylight. It was the first instance of political violence in the Republic, setting a chilling precedent for the future. But the Gracchi saga didn't end there. Gaius Gracchus, Tiberius's younger brother, picked up the reformist torch in 123 BC, determined to honor his brother's legacy and push for even broader reforms. Gaius wasn't just about land. He aimed to overhaul the entire socio-economic system. He proposed grain subsidies for the poor, infrastructure projects to create jobs, and even extended citizenship rights to allies, an idea that was about as popular as flatulence in the Senate chambers. Gaius's reforms were ambitious, and for a while he seemed unstoppable. He passed several laws and secured a second term as tribune, a rare feat that had the Senate squirming. But Gaius's star was destined to crash. In 121 BC, after a series of political missteps and mounting opposition, the Senate declared a state of emergency using the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, essentially giving themselves carte blanche to restore order by any means necessary. What followed was a bloodbath on the Aventine Hill, where Gaius and his supporters were hunted down. Gaius chose death by his own hand rather than face capture, ending the Gracchi chapter in a pool of blood and shattered dreams. The Gracchi brothers' attempt at reform was more than just a political footnote. It was a seismic event that exposed the fault lines within the Republic. Their deaths marked a turning point, revealing the lengths to which Rome's elite would go to protect their interests. The economic disparities that the Gracchi sought to address were exacerbating, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few while the masses scraped by on crumbs. The Republic was a ship sailing on troubled waters, and the Gracchi had merely rocked the boat. This era of turmoil was fertile ground for the rise of strongmen, charismatic leaders who saw opportunity in chaos. Enter Julius Caesar, a name that would come to define the end of the Roman Republic and the dawn of empire. Caesar was the ultimate political chameleon, a man who could charm a snake out of its skin and then wear it as a scarf. He rose through the ranks with a blend of military prowess, political savvy, and a pinch of audacity that made for a potent cocktail. Caesar's military campaigns, especially in Gaul, were not just about conquest. They were about building a personal brand. His commentaries on the Gallic War served as both a military report and a PR masterpiece, painting him as Rome's indispensable hero. But while Caesar was winning hearts and minds, the Senate was plotting his downfall with the kind of behind-the-scenes machinations that would make a reality TV producer proud. The tension between Caesar and the Senate reached a boiling point in 49 BC when the Senate, fearing his rising power, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar, not one for half measures, famously crossed the Rubicon River with his army, uttering, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast, knowing full well that this act was an irreversible step towards civil war. It was a bold move that left Rome teetering on the edge of chaos, and it wasn't long before the Republic's fragile institutions began to crumble. Caesar's rise to power was as meteoric as it was polarizing. In 44 BC, he declared himself Dictator Perpetuo, or Dictator for life, a title that was as unsettling to the Senate as a thunderstorm at a picnic. His assassination on the Ides of March by a group of senators, including his once ally Brutus, was both a climax and a catalyst. The Republic was already fractured, but Caesar's death shattered any illusion of unity. The ensuing power struggles and civil wars would pave the way for Rome's ultimate transformation into an empire under Augustus. So, as the curtain falls on the Roman Republic, we're left with a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless march of history. The Gracchi brothers' dreams of reform, the Senate's desperate grip on power, and Caesar's audacious rise all set the stage for an empire that would shape the course of Western civilization. The Republic's legacy is one of both inspiration and caution, a reminder that even the mightiest of institutions can crumble under the weight of their own contradictions. Stay tuned, because the story doesn't end here. Rome's journey from republic to empire is just the beginning of another chapter filled with emperors, gladiators, and the kind of political drama that continues to captivate us today. The Republic may have fallen, but its echoes still resonate, a testament to the enduring human quest for power, glory, and a place in the annals of history. You're standing in the heart of Tenochtitlan, a city so alive you can practically hear it breathing. The sun's barely up, but the place is already buzzing. Around you, the island city is waking up to the sounds of markets being set up, the clatter of canoes on the canals, and the chatter of people starting their daily hustle. Now, if you're thinking Aztec women are just hanging out in the background, think again. They're right here in the thick of it, playing roles that are as diverse as they are crucial. First off, let's tackle a persistent myth. Aztec women were not just confined to the kitchen, chained to their grinding stones like some pre-Columbian Cinderella. Sure, they cooked, but that was just one slice of their daily pie. They were involved in everything from the nitty-gritty of family life to the grander economic machinery of this Mesoamerican metropolis. Take weaving, for instance. It's not just a quaint craft activity here. It's practically an industry. Women are weaving textiles that are essential to the Aztec economy, and these aren't your average Etsy scarves. We're talking garments, blankets, and goods that are traded across the empire. The quality and quantity of textiles produced by women could make or break a household standing. And here's a fun fact. These textiles were sometimes even used as a form of currency. Yeah, you heard me right. Paying in thread, not bread. But before you start picturing them as mere cogs in a loom, let's talk economics. Aztec women were savvy traders. The marketplace was their domain, and they knew how to work it. Picture a bustling market, not just a farmer's market with organic avocados, but a sprawling, vibrant center of commerce. Women were out there, haggling and dealing like Wall Street brokers. And this wasn't just about selling a few trinkets. Market days, which could see upwards of 60,000 people, each a heart out, modern music festivals, were vital to the city's economy. Women were trading everything from food to luxury items, and their participation was essential to the community's economic health. So, what does this mean for the social status of women? Well, it's a mixed bag. In some ways, their economic roles gave them a certain level of power and independence. They weren't just sitting back, they were actively contributing to the family's wealth and status. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of the liberated Aztec woman. The society was patriarchal, and women didn't have equal standing with men. Their roles, while crucial, were often undervalued, and their voices, frequently unheard in the broader political sphere. But here's where it gets interesting. Women had a unique influence through the domestic sphere. The home wasn't just a place for family meals and bedtime stories. It was a microcosm of the larger society, and women ruled it. They made decisions that affected everything from the family's social alliances to its economic strategies. And let's not forget, they were the ones who passed down cultural and religious traditions, essentially shaping the next generation of Aztecs. Now, as you stroll through Tenochtitlan, you might notice that education wasn't just for the boys. Girls were educated too, though the end goals were different. They learned skills that were essential to their future roles, but it was education nonetheless. And it's not just about learning to weave or cook. They were taught about religion, music, and even the basics of medicine. In a world where knowledge is power, this education was a tool for women to wield within their permitted spheres of influence. So, as the day unfolds, you'll see the full tapestry of Aztec women's lives. From the domestic sphere to the bustling markets, their roles were varied and vital. They weren't just living in the shadows of their male counterparts, but actively shaping the world around them. And as the sun climbs higher over Tenochtitlan, you start to get a sense of the complex, vibrant, and sometimes contradictory world these women navigated every day. As the sun inches higher over Tenochtitlan, let's dive deeper into the world of Aztec education. The Aztecs weren't exactly running Hogwarts, but don't let anyone tell you that girls were left to scribble in the margins of history. Education for females was a thing, and it was far from trivial. It wasn't just about prepping them for a lifetime of weaving and grinding corn. Though, spoiler alert, those were definitely on the syllabus. Instead, it was a multidimensional curriculum that could put some modern educational systems to shame. You see, Aztec girls kicked off their educational journey at home, where they got a crash course in family life and responsibilities. But hold on, this wasn't just about learning how to be the perfect homemaker. Girls were taught skills that held economic weight. We're talking arts and crafts that could pay the bills, or at least contribute to the household's economic tapestry. And while they weren't exactly painting frescoes like Michelangelo, their work in textiles and crafts was crucial. These skills weren't just hobbies. They were hard currency, sometimes literally. Remember those textiles that doubled as money? Girls learned to create them with precision and artistry, wielding influence one fabric at a time. Now, let's unravel the myth of the uneducated Aztec woman. Sure, the patriarchy had a firm grip, but to say women were left in intellectual darkness is like claiming Montezuma was just a chill guy who liked feathered hats. The reality is far more nuanced. Girls attended schools called Karmakak or Tulpachkeli, depending on their social status. Karmakak was the Ivy League of the Aztec world, primarily for the nobility, focusing on leadership, religion, and history. Tulpachkeli was more like community college, offering practical education in crafts and trades. While boys and girls didn't attend the same classes, the end goal for girls was to make them well-versed in the arts that mattered to their world. Religious instruction was also a big deal. Girls learned about the gods and goddesses, because in a society where religion was woven into the very fabric of life, knowing your deities was as crucial as knowing your ABCs. They were also educated in music and dance, which might sound like an ancient version of joining a glee club, but it was serious business. These arts were tied to ceremonial life, and knowing the right steps and tunes could elevate a girl's status in society. Let's not forget the basics of medicine, either. It wasn't like they were performing open-heart surgery, but girls learned about herbal remedies and midwifery. In a society where life was as fragile as a clay pot in a storm, these skills were invaluable. Women were often the family healers, and their knowledge could literally mean the difference between life and death. And what about marriage, you ask? Well, getting hitched was a big deal, but it wasn't the ultimate goal of a girl's education. While marriage did serve as a social contract with economic and political benefits, a well-educated woman was seen as an asset far beyond her dowry. She was expected to contribute to the household's success and to pass down her knowledge to the next generation. So, while marriage was important, it wasn't the only defining moment in a woman's life. Here's a real kicker. Despite these impressive strides, women's voices were still largely absent from the political arena. They weren't writing the laws or leading armies, but they found their influence in subtler ways, through marriage alliances, religious ceremonies, and the ever-important marketplace. Their education equipped them to navigate these spheres with a deftness that might not have toppled empires, but certainly shaped them. So next time someone tries to tell you that Aztec women were just passive figures in a man's world, you can serve them a hearty dish of reality. These women were educated, involved, and influential in ways that defy the simplistic narratives. As you stroll through the vibrant chaos of Tenochtitlan, remember that women here weren't just living in the shadow of the pyramids. They were part of the beating heart that kept the city alive. The story doesn't end here, so keep your eyes peeled for more revelations as we continue to unearth the layers of Aztec society. Now, as the sun reaches its zenith over Tenochtitlan, let's pivot from domestic spheres and market hustles to the realm of politics, where you'd think testosterone was the only currency. Surprise! Women here wielded more power than a plot twist in a telenovela. Forget the tired trope of politics as a male-only arena. Noblewomen in the Aztec Empire were not just supporting actresses. They were power brokers in their own right, though often operating from behind the scenes. First up, let's chat about the elite ladies of the court. These noblewomen weren't just sitting around embroidering cushions. They were influencers before Instagram was a thing. In the high-stakes game of Aztec diplomacy, marriages were more strategic alliances than love stories. These women bridged family feuds and brokered peace deals like it was no biggie. They were the human embodiment of a peace treaty, their marriages sealing alliances between rival factions or consolidating power within the empire. And let's not forget, in a world where your family ties could determine your fate faster than a viral meme, these marriages were serious business. Consider the case of Tlazolteotl, a revered goddess whose earthly counterparts were women that played key roles in the religious and political machinations of the time. Her persona was invoked by women who acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people, often influencing decisions that rippled through the political landscape. These women weren't just whispering sweet nothings in the ears of the high priests. They were shaping the very laws of the land. But hold on. You might say, weren't these roles still shackled by the chains of the patriarchy? Absolutely. Yet within those constraints, women found cracks through which to wield influence. The Aztec Empire was a mosaic of city-states, each with its own ruler, and the women of these ruling families were pivotal in maintaining the delicate balance of power. They had the ear of their husbands, sons, and crucially, the council, which was the real power behind the throne. It was a bit like being the power behind the power, a role that required more finesse and subtlety than a political campaign in the digital age. Now, if you're picturing these women as Aztec Machiavellis plotting from behind feathered fans, you're not entirely off the mark. But it wasn't all cloak and dagger. Some women were openly acknowledged for their roles in governance. Take the case of Lady of Chila, a title held by several influential women throughout Aztec history. These women were not only revered for their wisdom, but were also consulted on matters of state, law, and religion. They were the original board members, if you will, shaping policies without ever needing to run for office. And let's debunk another myth while we're at it. Aztec politics wasn't all about blood and conquest. Sure, warriors got the glory, but in a society where the gods demanded constant appeasement, spiritual and diplomatic skills were equally prized. Women, particularly noblewomen, were the custodians of rituals and religious ceremonies, which in turn dictated political moves. They were essentially the PR agents between the earthly and the divine realms. Let's talk about the nitty-gritty. In the Aztec world, you had the Cihuacotl, a title often compared to a prime minister responsible for domestic affairs. While men typically held this position, women could exert influence by being the trusted advisors or confidantes to these powerful figures. Think of them as the chief strategist behind the chief strategist. It was a bit like being the speechwriter for a politician, crafting the narrative that would sway both public opinion and policy. Now, you might be wondering, why does any of this matter? Well, understanding the role of women in Aztec politics reveals the complexity of power dynamics in pre-Columbian societies. It shatters the simplistic notion that power was a male-only domain and highlights the ingenuity with which women navigated a patriarchal world. They were the unsung architects of political stability, using their roles as wives, mothers, and priestesses to weave together the social and political fabric of the empire. So, as you wander through the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan, remember that the politics of this vibrant city weren't just shaped by the men in feathered headdresses. Behind the scenes, women were pulling strings and making moves that would influence the course of Aztec history. And with that, we leave the door wide open for more revelations, because, believe me, the story of Aztec women is far from over. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the layers of this fascinating society. As we leave behind the political intrigues of Tenochtitlan, let's switch gears to something that was as central to Aztec life as maize and cacao, religion and spirituality. Forget the notion of women merely lighting incense and singing hymns in the background. In the Aztec world, women were spiritual heavyweights, swinging rituals like mystical kettlebells. They weren't just on the sidelines. They were center stage, sometimes even overshadowing their male counterparts like a spiritual Adele at the Grammys. Let's start with the priestesses, or as I like to call them, Aztec spiritual divas. These women weren't just dressing up for ceremonial gigs. They played a vital role in the spiritual and social life of their communities. They held titles such as Sihuacodal, a high-ranking priestess, which, despite sounding like an ancient Aztec rock band, was a position of significant authority. They performed rituals, interpreted the will of the gods, and guided the spiritual lives of the empire's citizens. Imagine having the power to influence decisions that affected the entire empire. These women were the oracles, the spiritual Siri of their time. Now, before you picture them as mystical gurus meditating in feather-adorned caves, let's talk about their daily grind. Being a priestess was no walk in the Chinampers. It involved rigorous training and a lifetime commitment to the spiritual and ceremonial calendar that could rival the busiest Hollywood socialite schedule. These women were expected to know their deities inside out, from Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war, to Zarchiquetzal, the goddess of love and beauty. Each deity had its quirks and demands, and the priestesses were the ones who made sure the divine inbox was always clear. And what about the rituals, you ask? Well, let's just say they were more intense than a Black Friday sale. Women's roles were not limited to passive participation. They were leading the charge. From bloodletting ceremonies to elaborate dances, they were at the forefront, ensuring that the gods remained appeased and the universe stayed in balance. These weren't your run-of-the-mill Sunday services. We're talking about events that could involve everything from flower offerings to, yes, human sacrifice. It was a spiritual high-wire act, where the stakes were as high as the pyramids themselves. But herein lies a myth begging to be busted. The idea that Aztec spirituality was an all-boys club. In reality, women had spiritual authority that sometimes rivaled or even exceeded that of men. Priestesses could interpret omens and prophecies, wielding influence that could make or break political careers faster than a scandalous tweet. They were the spiritual backbone of the community, guiding both civic and personal decisions with the wisdom that came from their divine connections. Now, let's take a closer look at the economics of spirituality. Yes, you heard that right. Spirituality in the Aztec world wasn't just an ethereal pursuit. It had economic ramifications. Women, through their spiritual roles, could influence the distribution of resources and the organization of labor. They dictated when certain ceremonies should occur, which in turn affected agricultural cycles and trade. A well-timed festival could boost local economies, drawing in people who would trade goods and services. It was a sacred economy, if you will, where the spiritual and material worlds were inextricably linked. Here's a fun fact to sprinkle at your next dinner party. Women were also the keepers of sacred knowledge. They maintained oral traditions and histories, ensuring that the stories of their people were passed down through generations. In a society where written records were primarily about tribute and taxes, the oral histories were the heartbeat of cultural identity. Women were the storytellers, the keepers of lore, and the ones who ensured that the voices of the past echoed into the future. Now, if you're thinking that being a priestess was all divine glory and no grit, think again. The role came with its share of sacrifices, sometimes literally. They were expected to abstain from certain foods, drink, and in some cases, even marriage and motherhood. Their lives were dedicated to the gods, and while this brought them prestige, it also isolated them from many of the societal norms that governed everyday life. It was a life not for the faint-hearted, but for those with a calling as deep as the cenotes of the Yucatan. So, as the afternoon sun casts long shadows over Tenochtitlan, it's clear that Aztec women were far more than passive believers in the shadow of the pyramids. They were spiritual leaders, economic influencers, and cultural torchbearers. They shaped the spiritual landscape of their world with a power that was as formidable as it was understated. As the day continues, and we prepare to explore yet another facet of Aztec life, remember that the story of these women is one of resilience, influence, and depth, and it's far from over. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the vibrant tapestry that is Aztec society. As the sun dips lower over Tenochtitlan, painting the city in hues of amber and gold, let's pivot to the myths and legends that swirl around Aztec women like so much morning mist. You see, history has this pesky habit of romanticizing the past until it resembles a sepia-toned telenovela. But if you're hoping for a tale of damsels in distress, think again. The women of the Aztec Empire were more warrior princess than wistful wallflower. First, let's tackle the myth of the submissive Aztec woman. This narrative suggests that women were merely meek observers in a male-dominated world. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a reality that's more nuanced than a Picasso painting. While it's true that the Aztec society was patriarchal, no surprise there. Given we're talking about the 15th century, women wielded power in ways that would make even Machiavelli take notes. They were the keepers of the home, the weavers of textiles, and the traders in the marketplace. They were the ones who turned a house into a home and a market stall into a thriving business. Now, let's talk numbers. In Tenochtitlan, a city estimated to have housed up to 200,000 people at its peak, women made up roughly half of this bustling metropolis. Imagine that many voices contributing to the hum of daily life, each one a thread in the rich tapestry of Aztec culture. While they might not have been the ones standing on the pyramid steps, calling for sacrifices to appease Huitzilopochtli, they were the ones ensuring the bureaucratic wheels kept turning. From managing household economies to participating in local trade, they were the unsung heroines of an empire known for its grandeur and brutality. But the myths don't stop there. Enter the legend of the Aztec priestess, shrouded in mystery and adorned with the allure of forbidden knowledge. Sure, the idea of a mystical priestess whispering secrets to the gods is tantalizing, but let's not forget the grit behind the glamour. These women were more than just figureheads in ceremonial garb. They were the spiritual bedrock of their communities, memorized the rituals, kept the calendar in sync with the celestial cycles, and interpreted omens with the precision of a modern-day data analyst. In a world where divine favor could mean the difference between a bountiful harvest and a season of famine, their roles were nothing short of vital. And here's another myth worth dismantling: the notion that Aztec women were mere pawns in the marital chess game. While marriages were indeed often arranged to strengthen political alliances, women were not simply bargaining chips. They were active participants in these alliances, using their positions to influence diplomacy and social policy. Their marriages were strategic moves in a game that required both cunning and collaboration. So why does any of this matter? Why should we care about the roles of women in an empire that fell over 500 years ago? Because the legacy of Aztec women is more relevant than you might think. After the Spanish conquest in 1521, which brought the mighty empire to its knees, the roles and perceptions of women shifted dramatically. Yet, the skills and knowledge they had cultivated didn't disappear. They adapted, survived, and in some cases, thrived in their new reality. The weaving skills that once created textiles for trade now produced goods for colonial markets. The trading acumen honed in Aztec marketplaces found new outlets in the colonial economy. In many ways, the fall of the Aztec Empire was a beginning rather than an end for these women. They were resilient, resourceful, and above all, adaptable. Their legacy is one of endurance, an echo from the past that reminds us of the strength and ingenuity that women have always brought to the table, even when that table was set by others. They were the quiet architects of continuity in a world that was anything but stable. So as the last rays of sun fade and the city prepares to rest, remember that the stories of Aztec women are not just historical footnotes. They're a testament to the enduring power of women to shape and influence their world, whether through the warp and weft of a loom or the subtle art of diplomacy. These women left a legacy that transcended the fall of their empire, echoing through history as a reminder that even in the shadows, their influence was and remains profound. So next time you hear the tales of Aztec warriors and conquistadors, don't just picture the men with feathered helmets. Remember the women who, though often unseen, were the ones weaving the real fabric of history. They're the unsung heroines of a bygone era, and their story, as complex and layered as the society they helped build, is far from over.